Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we've got 7 brand new stories. Ones that have never been shared here on the channel before. I'm so excited to finally bring you this special episode on one of my favorite nights of the entire year, Halloween. Tonight isn't just about candy and costumes. It's about the things that hide in the dark when no one's around. Hope you have a terrifying night, and an even harder time sleeping after. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. I confess I don't really know how to put into words what I'm going through right now, but I promise I'll do my best. Sorry if it comes out a little awkward or confused. The truth is, I'm going through something I don't even know whether I believe or how it's possible. And more than anything, I don't know what to do, and I need help understanding. I want to know if there are people who've experienced something similar and how they dealt with it. Another thing is that I wasn't the only one who went through this. My sister went through it too, as well as some kids who lived with us in that part of the country. But my sister and I haven't spoken in years, and the other kids from around here each went their own way. I have no idea where they might be today. It all happened more than 30 years ago. When I was 7, I spent most afternoons outside until the light went bad. We lived in a small house tucked into the lower Appalachians. Nothing fancy. Both of my parents worked the land, growing vegetables and raising animals. Most people in the area did exactly the same thing. The kids would gather in the streets and end up playing on their own. I don't know exactly when I first saw him, and there are a lot of details from that time I can't fully remember. But there are other things I recall as if they happened yesterday, not 30 years ago. Elijah was the kid who lived in the woods. That's how I remember him. Always half leaning against an oak or crouched on a fallen log, hair sticking up like he'd stuck his finger in a socket. He wore the same ratty overalls for months, even in summer. And he smelled like dirt and cigarette smoke, though I knew he didn't smoke. He had a grin that never reached his eyes and a habit of making people fall down for fun. On top of that, he looked sick most of the time, pale and wiry like he wasn't eating right. He should have been the kind of kid everyone else picked on, the one who got bullied. But Elijah never let that happen. Out of all of us, he was the leader. He was the rebel, full of personality, like he always knew more than any of us. And like I said, nothing made him happier than seeing someone hurt, or being the one to do it. At first, it was harmless stuff. He'd wait by the trail and tell us to race him, then shove us just as we reached the top of the stone wall. We'd tumble down, and he'd laugh so hard he threw his head back. Once, he took my sister's doll, smeared mud on its face, then dared her to grab it back. She did, and the head popped off. We all laughed, because you did what Elijah wanted. You wanted him to like you. It was around that time that my relationship with my sister started to fall apart. Elijah was especially cruel to her, mostly because she was small and cried easily. Not once did I take her side or defend her. I was terrified he'd turn on me next, so I laughed along with the others, sometimes even louder. I know I deserve the distance she's kept from me. Over time, his jokes escalated and got meaner. One time, he tried to set fire to our house while my sister and my dad were still inside. Even then, I couldn't bring myself to say it was Elijah. I played dumb, swore I had no idea what had happened. They made it out okay, but my sister burned her hand, and she still carries the scar to this day. But after that, I got cautious. I stopped going to the trail alone. I watched the woods with my chin tucked into my jacket like I was holding myself together just to keep an eye out. Elijah still came by, walking past the fence and calling my name like nothing was wrong. I asked my mom once who Elijah's mother was, if she knew the house where they lived. I was shocked when she told me she didn't know any Elijah. Our community was too small for that. But she didn't push the subject, and neither did I. She was worn out from working the fields, and I let it drop. One day Elijah led me to a clearing I'd never seen before. It was frighteningly close to our house, but somehow I had never noticed it. The place unsettled me, so I tried to play it off and told him there was a cooler spot up ahead, that we should go there instead. He got curious and followed. But maybe 2 minutes later I looked back, and I was alone. Elijah was gone. My stomach dropped. I wasn't allowed to be walking in the woods by myself. Then I remembered. It was Elijah. He was probably crouched behind a tree, waiting to jump out and scare me. So I braced myself and started back toward the house, tense the whole way, expecting him to leap out at any moment. But when I circled back to the spot where we'd first been, there he was, just sitting on the ground. His face was miserable, and for a second, I actually felt sorry for him. I asked if he was okay, and why he hadn't followed me. He just said he couldn't go any farther from our house than that distance. I didn't understand what he meant, so I pushed a little. He finally looked me dead in the eye and told me never to ask him about it again. And, as you can imagine, that's exactly what I did. After that, Elijah started showing up less. The last time I saw him, I was 9. He shoved a kid off his bike, and the boy had to be taken to the hospital. Back then, the nearest hospital was far, and hardly anyone around had a car, so it turned into a huge scandal in the village. The boy had fallen close to our house, so my mom came straight to me for answers. I knew this time it was serious, that Elijah wasn't just mean, he was dangerous. That night, for the first time, I told her everything. For once, she actually listened. She didn't brush me off, didn't tell me I was imagining things. Instead, she had a long, quiet talk with my dad later that night. A few days after, a woman came to our house. She burned some objects in the yard, small things I didn't recognize. I asked my mom what she was doing, and she told me they were just old items that had bugs in them, that it was better to get rid of them before we ended up with an infestation. I was 9, so I believed her. I didn't think much more about it. Then Elijah just stopped coming around. I don't think I ever saw him again. Sometimes, I'd wander into the woods and swear I felt like I wasn't alone. Like, he might step out from behind a tree at any second. But he never did. I felt a kind of loss, because for all his cruelty, he'd been one of the only friends I had. But more than that, I felt relief. And underneath it all was a constant fear that he might return. I asked my mom if she knew anything, and she told me his family had moved away, that I wouldn't be seeing him again. Time went on. Because of my cowardice, my sister and I never had a real relationship. Later, when we were teenagers, I tried to make peace with her. But she just told me it was too late. That I'd never been a brother to her. I don't blame her. When we finally left our parents' house, I lost contact with her completely. The only news I ever got came through my parents. That she'd married, that she had a child, that she had a good job, and was living well. But I never knew more than that. Both my parents passed away last year, only a few days apart. It was the first time I'd seen my sister in years at the funeral. Even then, she kept her distance, and so did I. She told me there were a few things from the house she wanted, but the rest was mine. For almost a year, I didn't step foot in that house. Then, 2 months ago, I decided it was time to start cleaning it out, preparing to sell it. I had no idea how many boxes were in the basement. I thought it'd be quick work, but it's been dragging on. And I'm only telling you all this now because 3 days ago I found a box filled with photographs of people I didn't recognize. At first I assumed they were distant relatives, but then I realized they were the previous owners of the property, before my parents bought it. I never knew much about the story, only that my parents had gotten the land for next to nothing, because nobody else wanted it. There were even people in the village who wouldn't come to our house when I was a kid. My mom always brushed it off as old superstition. But then, buried among those photographs, I saw him. It was Elijah, lying in a bed, sickly and mean-looking. Exactly as I remembered him. I couldn't understand why we would have a photo of Elijah in our house. So I started digging through old property records. And that's when I found out the truth. Elijah had lived in that house before my parents bought it. Worse, he died there, in a fire. He'd been a sick child, kept inside most of the time. One day the fire started, and he never made it out. I've spent the last 3 days in shock. I don't know what to think. I called my sister and told her everything. She listened quietly, then said she'd been through enough and refused to put herself through that again. She didn't want to hear any more about it, and she told me not to call her again. I honestly don't know what to believe or what to do. I've reached out to a university professor who specializes in the modern history of this region, hoping he can shed some light. But right now, I'm just lost. I don't even know how to start explaining this, because every time I try to tell someone, I sound like I'm exaggerating. Like I'm trying to make something ordinary sound terrifying. But that's not what this is. My wife and I live in a small cabin in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, surrounded by thick woods that seem to breathe at night. I promise I'm not exaggerating. These forests are truly alive, and anyone who spends a little time here, or who can notice small details, knows what I mean. It's the kind of place that feels cut off from everything, quiet in a way that makes you notice every sound, every shift in the air. Not that the whole area where we live is like this. There's a small village nearby with the essentials for people to live comfortably. But here, where we are, it's completely isolated. Unlike most people who choose to live this way, in our case, it wasn't a choice. A year after my wife and I got married, I was diagnosed with leukemia. And since then, we've lost almost everything. My wife had a good job, and we were able to save a little. But with treatments and appointments, we were practically driven to poverty. Living here was the only solution to not end up living under a bridge. Still, Even though we both live difficult lives, my wife has this gift for making everything better, finding every positive point and pulling it to the maximum. And honestly, she's pulled me out of depression more than once. So, even though living so isolated wasn't really a choice, it wasn't absolutely terrible, and we did our best to make it work. We were even finding a bit of happiness. But about a month ago, everything changed. Since September 17th of this year, everything we'd been working towards started to fall apart. That was the first night we heard it. A whistle, coming from outside the house. It was around 10:30 p.m. We were watching a show on my laptop in bed when it came. Faint at first. Just 3 soft notes, stretched out like someone trying to get the attention of a dog far away. I remember pausing the video and looking at her. We both listened. It came again, a little louder. The same slow whistle, like a tune that had been stripped of rhythm. At first, there was no reason to panic. It really could have been someone calling their dog or maybe a familiar neighbor. It was strange because of how isolated we are. But it wasn't impossible that someone might be walking through the forest. The strangest part was that it was nighttime, and locals almost never go into the woods after dark. Still, I got up and checked the porch, the yard. Even went to the tree line with my flashlight. I wouldn't go any further than that. But I didn't hear anything else. Didn't see any movement. So I went back to bed. The next night, it came again. And by the end of that week, the whistle was constant. Not all day, but every night, without fail. It always started around the same time and lasted for hours. Sometimes it would drift closer, almost like whoever was doing it knew exactly where our bedroom was, as if they were right outside the window, even though our bedroom window is on the 2nd floor and there's no balcony. I tried convincing myself it was a prank, that maybe some local kid had found a way to mess with us. It was definitely persistent. But in my head, it had to be someone messing around. I even joked about it at first, though I could tell my wife wasn't amused. She's always been more sensitive to the forest, sometimes noticing an animal before I do, or sensing when the weather was about to change. Small details that might seem insignificant, but have always shown me she has much better intuition than I do, and that I should listen when she talks about the woods. As the nights went on, the whistle started to get under her skin. In a way I didn't want to admit, it was getting under mine too. There was something about it that didn't sound random. It wasn't just noise. It was deliberate. Like it really was a person coming every night just to harass us. One night, it got bad. It was around 2 in the morning, pitch black, and the whistle woke me up. This time, it wasn't coming from outside the house. It was inside. At least that's what my brain told me. It was so close it felt like it was in the same room. I sat up and held my breath. The sound came again. Clear and sharp, from the direction of the closet. My wife whispered my name, asking if I heard it. Her voice was trembling. I didn't even answer. Just grabbed her hand and stared at the closet door, waiting for it to happen again. It did. 3 long, slow notes. I could see the handle of the closet door, motionless, but the sound came from behind it. I swear it did. I couldn't bring myself to open it. We just sat there, frozen, listening. until it stopped. The next morning, my wife told me she was sure it had come from inside the bedroom. She said it with such conviction that for the first time, I didn't even try to rationalize it. I just nodded. From that point on, things got worse. The whistle came earlier and louder, sometimes from behind the house, sometimes right by the porch steps. I bought cameras, motion lights, even tied fishing line across the path that led from the woods to our yard, so I'd know if someone passed through. I spent money I didn't have on all that. But every morning, everything was untouched, and there was nothing on the footage. Nothing moved. We started losing sleep. I could see her falling apart from exhaustion, from fear, and I wasn't doing much better. Every sound made us tense up. Even during the day, we'd catch ourselves listening, waiting for that sound to start again. 2 weeks ago, we called the police. It felt ridiculous, trying to explain over the phone that we were being harassed by a whistle. But the dispatcher didn't laugh. She sent someone out. When the 2 officers arrived, one of them looked like he'd been doing this job forever. Older guy, quiet, didn't say much. I told them everything, from the beginning. When I mentioned the whistle coming from inside the house, the younger officer tried to hide a smirk, but the older one didn't even blink. He just stared at me, and for a moment his face went pale, like something I said hit too close to home. He asked what day it started. I told him, September 17th. He didn't say another word after that, just nodded slowly and stepped outside, standing there for a long time, scanning the tree line. They took a report, said they'd patrol the area a few nights, and that was that. But I knew from the look on that man's face that something about what I told him wasn't new to him. It was like he already knew the story. That night, the whistle came back, and I swear it was louder. I sat on the edge of the bed, gun in hand, listening. My wife was buried under the covers, barely breathing. I feel like what's happening isn't just affecting her mentally, it's affecting her physically, like it's draining her energy. It's more than just emotional exhaustion. But when I ask if she's okay, she forces a smile and says she is. But I can feel the tension in her body, the silent panic. The whistle came from the porch this time, slow and mocking. And then it stopped. Silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then it started again, from the back of the house. It was moving. I went to the window, but didn't see anything. Just the faint reflection of my own face, pale and sleepless. I stayed there for hours, until the sky turned gray. At some point, I looked out the window again. And that was the first time I actually saw something. And honestly, I wish I hadn't. It was this dark shape, like the shadow of a person, but moving, alive somehow. There was no light behind it, no reason for there to be a shadow at all, yet it was there. Then what looked like its head turned, and even though it didn't have eyes, I knew, without a doubt, it was looking right at me. I stumbled back, tripped over the rug, and hit the floor hard. My wife asked what happened, if I was okay. All I managed to say was that I got spooked, that I thought I saw something, but must have been wrong. I had to be wrong. Because if I told her what I really saw, it would have made it real. Since then, I've stopped trying to prove anything. I turned off the cameras. I don't check the yard anymore. I just stay inside, waiting for the sound to come again, because it always does. every single night. I've started to think that maybe it's not someone trying to scare us. Maybe it's not someone at all. Because I don't even understand what it could be. All I know is that the whistle hasn't stopped since that first night. I feel like it's going to get worse. And I'm especially afraid of Halloween night. Before all this, I didn't believe in anything. But now I feel like those stories about the veil between our world and the other getting thinner might have some truth to them. My grandmother used to tell me stories when I was a kid. What used to be just stories now echo in my skull like a bad omen. We're both desperate and don't know what to do. What I'm about to tell you happened last year, on Halloween night. Since then, it hasn't really stopped happening. Even though nothing truly bad has happened yet, I'm scared that this coming October 31st, something genuinely terrible might take place. Honestly, I was never the kind of person to believe in superstitions or forest creatures, but now, I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is that I'm scared. I'm scared for myself, and especially for my parents. It was late October in West Virginia, and I had the house all to myself. My parents had driven down to visit my aunt in South Carolina for the week like they did every year around Halloween. I'd always hated Halloween, not because of the costumes or candy, but because of something that happened when I was 9. A neighbor, a kid I used to play with, did something so messed up to a stray cat that the image never really left me. Back then, it was common for cults to operate around here, and people would hurt animals. Even though I know it's much rarer these days, the idea that it could still be happening haunts me. Since then, Halloween had this dark, ugly feeling attached to it. I never celebrated it, never dressed up, never even opened the door to trick-or-treaters. At the time this happened, I wasn't living with my parents anymore. I lived in the city, but I used to come back often and spend a few weeks with them at the house. In the city, Halloween was a big deal, but out there, in such an isolated area, I doubted anyone would bother us. The house sat on the edge of the woods, a good 20-minute drive from the nearest town. No close neighbors, no streetlights. Just an old 2-story house surrounded by a tree line that always looked like it was hiding something. My parents had built their lives out here, loving the silence. For me, that silence always felt heavy. That's why I chose to move to an area with more people. Still, I liked feeling that isolation sometimes, which is why I often went back to stay with them. I liked experiencing that kind of quiet on my own terms, only when I decided I wanted it. I had spent most of the evening in the living room, scrolling through my phone with the TV on just to fill the space with some background noise. It was a little after 8 p.m. when I started noticing how quiet everything outside had gotten. Not unusual for this place, but different. The crickets weren't chirping, and the woods behind the house sounded dead. I know it sounds like a total cliché, and everyone says this kind of thing happens. But the truth is, ever since this happened a year ago, I've been obsessed with the weird stuff that goes on in this part of the country. The way everything goes quiet right before shit hits the fan is way too common. I don't know why it happens, but some people say animals go silent when there's a predator nearby. Honestly, that explanation makes a lot of sense to me, but even then, I'm still not sure what to think of it. At 10:17 p.m., the first thing happened. A loud beep from the security system. Rear motion sensor triggered. The back of the property. The cameras were old but still worked fine, so I pulled up the feed on my phone. Nothing. Just darkness and the faint outline of the tree line. I stepped outside to check the panel. my breath visible in the cold air. But there was no movement, no sound. So I reset the alarm and went back inside. Around 11:30, I heard it. A high-pitched whistle coming from somewhere near the trees. Sharp, clean, and way too deliberate to be the wind. Could it have been someone celebrating Halloween? Kids never trick-or-treated in this area. I forced myself to walk to the front door and open it. The porch light spilled out into the yard, lighting up the dirt driveway, the front fence, and a patch of trees. But once again, there was no one there and I didn't see any movement at all. The thing is, of course I'd heard plenty of legends about whistling in the forest. My grandparents and a few close friends who also grew up in those areas take that stuff really seriously. Any other night of the year, I would have just ignored the whistle. Even though I don't believe in that kind of thing, I usually don't let it get to me. But that Halloween night, my first thought was that someone was actually calling out. To make things worse, the doorbell was partially covered by a climbing plant. So anyone who didn't know the house, especially at night, probably wouldn't have even seen it. I even called out, asking if someone was there, but no one answered back. I told myself some teenager was probably messing around, but I couldn't ignore the way that whistle had crawled under my skin. I locked the door and turned off the TV. 10 minutes later, I got up to grab water from the kitchen. When I turned the corner, I saw it. A tall, thin figure standing just outside the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. Taller than any man I'd ever seen, dressed in all black from head to toe, face covered with a black mask. The only thing not black were the eyes. Yellow, narrow, snake-like. They locked on me through the glass. It wasn't some Halloween prank costume. It didn't look cheap. It didn't look like something you'd find in a store. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. I didn't even think. I bolted to my parents' bedroom, grabbed my dad's handgun from the safe, and ran back to the kitchen. But there was nothing there anymore. Beyond the glass, all I could see was the vast, endless darkness of the forest. I didn't sleep after that. I spent the entire night pacing through the house, checking the locks, turning on lights, walking past the windows again and again. Every creak made me flinch, but what kept replaying in my head was those eyes. I tried to convince myself it was just some idiot playing a prank, maybe someone from town trying to scare people out in the sticks. I really convinced myself it was just the darkness, that I'd seen it wrong, that I was just nervous. These days, people make insanely realistic masks anyway. The next day, I decided not to say anything to my parents. I was completely convinced it had just been some Halloween bullshit, and that we wouldn't have any problems. After all, whatever it was hadn't tried to get inside, and by morning, there were no footprints anywhere on the property. I convinced myself there was no reason to panic. The problem is, ever since that night, my parents have had several incidents where the alarm goes off almost always after 3 a.m., especially during certain times of the year. They barely get any sleep for weeks. They even replaced the alarm system, thinking it was a malfunction. They called the police, which is something almost unheard of around here. But the truth is, there's never any sign of anything. Neither of them has ever seen anyone or anything close to what I saw. And obviously, I'm not about to tell them I saw some creature with snake-like eyes. The cameras around the property never capture anything. Even when the alarm goes off, there's nothing there. What really scares me is that Halloween is coming around again. and I can't shake the feeling that things might get worse that night. I've been trying to convince my parents to spend Halloween somewhere else, but they keep insisting they want to stay home. I've always had this one ritual. Every Halloween I go out into the mountains, pack minimal gear, hike up to some remote spot, and spend the night alone. No phone bars, no other campers. Just me, the forest, the lookout cabin or tower I pick, and whatever the night brings. It started off as a way to face fear, to get comfortable being vulnerable. I've done it a few times. Each time there've been odd little things. Creaks, weird shadows, nights where the wind seems to know your name. But I've never been genuinely rattled. Until this year. To be honest, I don't even know what year this whole tradition of mine started. But I think I first heard about it at some random dinner with friends. Someone there was telling the story about how they had a kind of crazy friend who did it. I thought it was weird at the time too. But as I was driving home after that dinner, the idea kept buzzing in my head. And somehow I got obsessed with trying it myself. The first time was absolutely terrifying, but there was something beautiful in that fear I felt. And since that first experience, I gotta say, I've been hooked. I know it probably sounds kinda messed up to most of you, but hey, it makes me happy. We all do what we need to do to stay afloat in a world that sometimes feels like it's about to collapse on top of us. So, yeah. Even though some weird stuff has happened before, nothing like what went down the last time I did it. Last Halloween, almost a year ago, I chose a spot I'd heard about but never used before. A firewatch tower perched high up on a ridge in the southern Appalachians. One of those old cabins, or towers, built for forest fire lookouts back in the mid-20th century. The hike up in the late afternoon was crisp, leaves turning, air a little sharp. Typical for that time of year. I got there just before sunset, climbed the last rough switchbacks, dropped my pack, and got everything set up. The lookout had glass windows all around, panoramic views, also pretty typical for most of these places. At dusk, you could see the ridges rolling away into bluish shadows, and the forest closing in. I set up my sleeping bag in the small wood floor cabin that's connected to the tower structure. Gathered some dry wood, started a fire in the metal ring outside, and cooked dinner on my little camp stove. I've always loved watching fire, especially the way it throws shadows around everything near it. I felt confident. I'd done this before. I knew the risks, and I felt ready. One thing I should probably say, I'm not someone who really believes in the supernatural. I mean, sure, I think there are things out there we don't understand, and maybe don't want to understand. But I don't buy into most of the legends and stories floating around about these mountains. I like reading about them, and I like trying to figure out if there's any truth to them. But I'm not someone who genuinely believes the stuff I'm reading. So, after dinner, I went back inside the lookout to grab some papers I'd printed and brought with me, and I started reading. A week or two before leaving, I'd done a bit of digging into local lore. I found this legend about the so-called Black Dog. According to Appalachian folklore, there's this big black dog, ghostly, kinda spectral, that shows up mostly at night on ridgelines and forest roads, often as an omen of misfortune or just a warning. Again, I didn't believe much of it, especially since everyone who claimed to have seen it told a different version, some of them wildly different. Still, I wanted to know more about the legend, and what better night than Halloween? Around 10 p.m., I got up to lock the door tight, make sure the fire I'd lit had burned out, and climbed into my sleeping bag. The sounds around me were completely soothing. The wind, the animals, the whole atmosphere was magical, and it quickly carried me off to sleep. Sometime around 2 a.m., I woke up, not sure why. The lookout was pitch black, and even the forest outside was dark as hell. Could barely see past the tree line. The wind had picked up, so I stood up to get a better look at the landscape around me. That's when I heard something. Maybe a thump. Though it was so quick and sudden that honestly, I'm not totally sure I really heard it. Then I heard it again. Another sound. It was subtle. I froze, looking around, trying to figure out what I'd just heard. I can't really explain what I felt, but I know I felt it. Like that noise didn't belong to everything else around me. The forest wasn't silent. There were plenty of sounds, but somehow, that one stuck out. Then I heard another thump. Louder this time. I couldn't tell if it was coming from the stairs below me or from the roof above, but it definitely sounded like something hitting metal. I thought maybe it was another person trying to use the lookout. These places kind of self-manage. You never know if someone else might show up. Still, it was weird, and honestly, a little terrifying. To think someone might be climbing up the stairs to join me in the middle of the night. I thought about opening the door, shouting into the dark that the place was taken, and asking whoever it was to leave. I really didn't want to share the space with some random person wandering around at that hour. After a short internal debate, I finally opened the door and stepped out onto the small balcony that overlooked the stairs. And that's when I saw it. No doubt about it. On the stairs was this huge black dog, massive, and at the same time kind of transparent, like it was just a reflection of a dog, or its shadow. It was looking right at me, even though I couldn't make out any eyes or facial expression. Then, while we were staring at each other, it suddenly bolted straight toward me. I did exactly the same. Ran for the lookout door, slammed it shut behind me, and locked it. My heart was pounding, mostly because I couldn't come up with a single logical explanation for what I'd just seen. The dog couldn't have been a ghost. I heard it climbing the stairs. But it also couldn't have been a real dog because its body wasn't solid. I could feel it right outside the door, just inches away. I could hear it walking, even breathing. This heavy, labored breathing. The whole night I stayed there, sitting against the door, like the weight of my body might somehow stop it from coming in. While I listened to its footsteps circling the lookout, I kept trying to come up with a logical reason for what I'd seen. Around 5:30 in the morning, I heard it walk down the stairs and disappear back into the woods. I was still panicking, with no idea what I'd actually seen. I wanted it to have just been a dog, no matter how big or scary, because at least that would have been something I could understand. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. I knew that dog wasn't really a dog, not in the way we know them. I called a friend and asked him to come pick me up. Even though cars don't usually go up there, there's this old road, and if you've got a Jeep, you can make it pretty easily. To this day, I haven't told anyone about it. Not even him. I made up some story about someone harassing me and making me feel unsafe. He insisted I go to the cops, but come on. If I told the police what I actually saw, they'd probably try to lock me up in a psych ward or just laugh in my face. So, yeah. I'm telling this for the first time now, Because Halloween's just a few days away, and I think for the first time in years, I'm just gonna stay home for the night. I have spent most of my life trying not to remember the autumn of 2001. Yet every October the air turns sharp and smells faintly of iron and smoke. And I find myself pulled back to that small cabin my family used to visit in the high folds of the Appalachian Mountains. A place that once seemed like a refuge, and now feels like a wound carved into the land itself, refusing to close. No matter how much therapy I do, no matter how many times I talk or write about it, it seems that no matter what I do, I can't close the wound. And I'm destined to die with this pain in my chest. I wish reality weren't like this, but it is. And maybe part of the healing process is learning to live with the pain. I don't even know anymore. My father had built that cabin years before I was born, believing that the solitude of the mountain would keep the world at bay, that the forest would cleanse us of everything artificial and cruel. But perhaps there are places that were never meant to hold families, places that feed on silence and memory. And our mistake was thinking that nature was ever gentle with those who lingered too long under its shadow. We would always go in mid-October when the leaves had begun their slow transformation into rust and gold, and the air carried that quiet hum that only dying things seem to know. I also want to apologize to anyone who is listening or reading the story if it seems a little unreal, or even written in a way that makes it seem unreal. I have written it so many times in my diary that it feels as though I have perfected the details, even the most insignificant things. It's as if it has become a protective mechanism, focusing on the smallest details, so I don't have to confront what really happened. I remember the road that wound endlessly upward, the tires crackling over gravel, and the sky thinning until it felt too close, and how my brother Eli sat beside me in the back seat, watching the tree line with a kind of stillness that didn't belong to a child, as if he recognized something waiting for him there. It was our last trip together, though none of us knew that yet. And maybe that is why every detail of that weekend has remained inside me, suspended, like a photograph I never wanted to look at again, but could never quite destroy. The cabin was older every year, its wood swollen from rain and years of neglect. And inside it smelled of ash, old pine, and something faintly sweet. Something that I could never identify, and that seemed to cling to our clothes even after we left. The first night, I remember the forest being utterly still. No wind, no insects. Only that enormous silence pressing against the windows, so heavy that even breathing felt intrusive. And I recall thinking that perhaps the mountain was holding its breath for us, waiting for us to notice how out of place we were. My brother seemed restless that evening, walking circles around the cabin's perimeter as if tracing something invisible. And my parents thought little of it. But there was a look in his eyes that unsettled me, an unfocused calmness, like he was listening to something only he could hear, something deep beneath the ground. That night I read him 3 stories to calm him, but they were old tales, stories about the mountains. And in a way I think they did calm him, yet they left me in an even greater heap of nerves. I think I knew that something was about to happen. The following day passed in that hazy rhythm of family ritual. The smell of smoke, the slow preparation of meals, my father chopping wood, my mother whistling softly as she went about the day's chores. And yet beneath all of it there was a quiet dissonance, A sense that something beneath the surface of our ordinary gestures was watching, patient and unseen. It was the following night that something happened. At first, I thought I had only dreamed it. I was convinced of it. But then I understood. I woke in the middle of the night, cold. A freezing cold that seemed to seep into my bones. And as my eyes adjusted to the room, I saw my brother at the window, staring at something outside. Something moving in a strange, shadowy way. I never saw its face because I genuinely thought I was dreaming. The next day, I didn't even ask him what had happened, afraid that it was real and that I would have to face it. When we returned home, the silence of the mountain came with us, lodged under our skin. Eli changed first. He began waking in the night, standing by the window for hours, his breath fogging the glass, staring toward the north, as if the mountains had followed him there. He became thinner, paler, and there was something about his stillness that unnerved me. It was as though he were trying to become invisible, to dissolve into that same quiet that had filled the cabin. My parents whispered about stress, about school, about the strange effects of growing up. But I knew that whatever had touched him in those woods was bad, really bad. Weeks passed before he vanished. And when he did, it was not sudden but almost expected, as if he had been slowly slipping away one layer at a time, until finally his absence became visible. My parents found the front door open at dawn, a trail of small footprints leading down the hill toward the river. And then, nothing. The search lasted days, and I remember the faces of men covered in mud and exhaustion, the smell of dogs and diesel, the hollow echo of my mother's voice calling a name that I knew already belonged to the trees. There's no point in asking me how I could feel all of this, how I could be so certain. Maybe it was because we were twins, and somehow communicated through something other than words. I don't really know. I only know that at the time, I felt it. I knew that he was facing something I couldn't interfere with, that he was going to disappear, probably searching for whatever had reached out to him in the forest. I told my parents parts of it. My father almost hit me, accusing me of trying to use my brother's misfortune to get their attention. But my mother knew that what I said was true. Neither she, nor I, nor Eli himself ever set foot on that cabin floor again. She never allowed it. When they finally found him, it was 6 days later and 20 miles from home, sitting by a creek, barefoot, his clothes dry and his expression calm, as if nothing had happened, as if he had simply gone for a walk through the woods and returned from some place that language could not reach. He was never the same after that, though the doctors said he was unharmed, and for a while we tried to pretend that we could still live as before. But there are certain silences that grow like mold through a family. Certain glances that begin to mean things no one will admit aloud. At this moment, he is confined to a psychiatric hospital. They call him insane, a danger to us. But I know he is not insane. He simply saw something that none of us are capable of understanding. What I'm about to tell you was without a doubt the most stressful and terrifying experience of my life. My husband and I live in West Virginia, and we own 2 houses. When we got married, we bought a small apartment in Charleston. But unfortunately, both my parents passed away very early. Since I'm an only child, I inherited their house. For a long time, we debated whether to sell it and keep the apartment. But both my husband and I always had this fantasy of living somewhere more remote. Since that house is literally in the middle of nowhere, we slowly started restoring it. And now we spend long periods of time living there. When I say the house is completely isolated, I don't mean it's off the grid. We have 2 neighbors, each about a 3-minute drive away. Still, they're also isolated. Nothing particularly strange had ever happened there. Once, our neighbor behaved a little odd, and when we later asked if she was okay, she said she didn't remember any of it. Aside from that, everything had been normal. Maybe the reason nothing weird had ever happened is because both my husband and I are extremely respectful of the woods around us. We know perfectly well that we are the intruders, that the forest is sacred and home to creatures far older than us. So we never go out after dark, and never do anything that could be considered disrespectful. I had also never stayed there alone, until about 2 weeks ago. There had been a small storm, and it was enough for my husband to get called in for work. He's a lineman, so he's often called out on short notice. At first, I thought about going back to our place in Charleston, but the job was supposed to be quick, only a couple of days, and I already felt comfortable enough in that house to stay alone. So that's what I did. The first day was normal. I'll admit I was a little tense. The house is way too big for one person, and the woods at night can feel pretty oppressive. I avoided the windows at all costs and tried to distract myself. Watched a movie, read a book, played some music. Then around 3 in the morning, I woke up with the feeling that my husband was calling me. I've always been a heavy sleeper. Someone calling my name doesn't usually wake me. The room was pitch dark. I couldn't see anything except faint shadows passing across the curtains. I was spooked, but the last thing I wanted was to get out of bed. I pulled the sheets over my head and tried to ignore the feeling as best I could. The next morning, I woke up around 9. The room was bright, and that strange feeling from the night before was completely gone. I felt refreshed and convinced myself it had just been a dream. The rest of the day went normally, just like the day before. I answered a few work emails. Even though I was on vacation, I knew nobody else would handle them if I didn't. Then I distracted myself by going through some boxes of my parents' old documents stored in the attic. Most of it was probably junk, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. And by the time I was done, it was already past 7:30 p.m. I heated up some leftovers from the night before and put on a movie. The house felt so cozy that I must have dozed off on the couch. I didn't go upstairs until around 1:30 in the morning. I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed when I heard something that froze me completely. My husband's voice calling me. That was impossible. He wasn't supposed to be back until the next night. If he had come home early, he would have told me. Besides, he had a key. He could have just walked in. I went to the bedroom window and saw him. There was no doubt. It was him. I opened the window and asked what was going on, and he just kept asking me to let him in. It was his voice, but the way he said it, it wasn't him. Still, it looked like my husband, so I shut the window and started walking toward the bedroom door. But something stopped me. Something wasn't right. I don't know if it was instinct, but I walked back to the window and peeked out without him noticing. That's when I saw his expression, one I'd never seen before. His head kept twitching to the right, over and over. Maybe 3 times, before he seemed to grow impatient and look straight toward me. My whole body went cold. I knew right then that wasn't my husband. But how could it not be? The face was the same. The voice was the same. I sat down on the floor, heart racing, trying to make sense of what was happening. It took me several minutes to calm down enough to call my husband. I didn't think he'd answer. He often doesn't have cell service where he works. But he picked up. I asked where he was and if everything was okay. His answer made my stomach drop. He was still at work. Which meant that whatever was outside my house, asking to be let in, wasn't him. I tried to keep my voice steady so I wouldn't worry him. I made up a story about having a weird feeling and just wanting to check on him. I knew if I told him what was really going on, he'd rush home, possibly putting himself in danger or losing his job. I looked out the window again, but he was no longer in view. I checked the other rooms, but I couldn't see him anywhere. Then, as I started walking downstairs, halfway down the steps, I saw his shadow pressed against the kitchen window. The chill that ran through me was so strong I almost fainted. I ran back upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom. For the rest of the night, I kept hearing him, or it, asking to be let in, begging. I couldn't understand what was happening, but I thanked God I hadn't opened the door. When morning finally came, I got up from the bathroom floor and looked out the window. No one was there. The woods were calm and beautiful again, as if nothing had happened. When my husband finally came home that night, I told him everything. We packed up and went back to Charleston. It's been 2 weeks since then, and we haven't returned to my parents' house. I talked to several friends who lived nearby, and they all said whatever was trying to get in was a mimic. My husband thinks it was just some man with bad intentions pretending to be him. But I know what I saw, and what I felt. It was exactly my husband, but not him. He says my panic probably made me build a story that isn't real. Maybe he just doesn't want to face the idea that there are things out there we still don't understand. I don't blame him. Until 2 weeks ago, I didn't believe it either. I said I respected the forest and the beings in it, but I didn't truly understand what that meant. Now my biggest question is why it wanted to come inside, what its intentions were. Some people told me those things are harmless. Others said never to answer or open the door. I don't know what to believe, but I do know one thing. I'm not going back to that house anytime soon. The feeling I had that night was anything but good. I've always thought there's a difference between getting lost and being misplaced. When you're lost, you know it, and some part of you keeps searching for a way back. But when you're misplaced, you don't even realize it until everything familiar has already dissolved. Until the world around you has rearranged itself into something that looks like the place you started, but feels entirely different. That's what the mountains did to me, or maybe to us. I'm still not sure which. All I know is that somewhere around the 5th mile of that second day, the trail we were following stopped feeling like a path and started feeling like a trick. I know the way I'm starting this story might sound a bit strange, and I'm sorry for that. First, because that's honestly how I felt, and it's the best way I can describe it to you. And second, because writing down and putting into words an experience like this feels, at the very least, strange. There were only 2 of us, me and Rachel. We'd planned the trip months before. Just a long weekend hiking along the southern stretch of the Appalachians. Somewhere quiet. Off-season enough that we wouldn't run into the usual tourists with GoPros and hammocks. I don't mean this in a negative way. I have nothing against them. I just prefer not to appear in other people's videos or background shots. I'd been burned out from work. She just ended a relationship that had taken too much from her, and the whole idea was to disconnect, to breathe air that hadn't touched concrete in a while. We packed light, stuck to the essentials, and agreed not to talk about anything heavier than weather for at least 2 days. The first day went smooth, with a cold morning, dry leaves underfoot, the kind of crisp air that wakes you up better than coffee. The trail wound through ridges that caught the sun in broken slants, lighting up patches of moss like glass. We hiked until our legs ached, found a flat spot near a stream, and set up camp. It was quiet in the good way. No traffic, no hum of power lines, just wind and the faint rush of water. That night we made instant noodles, drank half a flask of whiskey, and fell asleep to the sound of the stream like it was a lullaby we'd forgotten existed. It was the next afternoon when things shifted. Not in any obvious way, just small details. Small enough that they only bothered me once I started connecting them. The air felt thicker. The trees looked different, taller, though I couldn't have said why. Rachel said I was just tired, that my brain was making patterns out of nothing, and she was probably right. But as the day went on, I started to notice something else. The silence. The woods were supposed to be full of life. Birds, insects, the occasional rustle of something small. But by evening, the sound had drained away like someone had turned down a volume knob I didn't know existed. When we stopped to make camp again, I couldn't shake this sense that the place didn't want us there. A low hum in the back of my mind that wouldn't quiet down. Rachel laughed it off when I told her. "It's the woods," she said. "They're just playing tricks on you." But the way she said it sounded forced, like she was trying to convince herself too. We fell asleep early, both of us pretending everything was fine. Somewhere deep in the night, I woke up. No noise, no movement, just a feeling, like I'd been nudged awake by something. I lay there for a long time, eyes open, waiting for a sound that never came. And then I noticed the light. A pale, dim glow filtering through the tent fabric from outside. Steady and colorless. Not fire, not moonlight. I remember holding my breath, counting heartbeats, and then unzipping the tent just enough to see. There was nothing. Just trees. But not like before. The trunks seemed closer together, bending inward slightly, like the forest had shifted shape while we slept. I blinked and it looked normal again, but I swear it hadn't been. That faint glow lingered though, hovering in the distance like a mist that didn't belong to the air around it. I watched it until it faded, until I convinced myself I was dreaming, and crawled back into the tent. In the morning, Rachel said she'd slept great. I didn't mention what I'd seen. We packed up, followed the trail north. But something about it had changed. Turns we didn't remember. Markers missing where they should have been. She said maybe we'd taken a wrong turn, but I'd memorized that route. I knew every bend from the map. Still, nothing looked right anymore. By afternoon, I started hearing it. A soft, almost rhythmic sound. Far away but distinct, like someone dragging a stick through leaves in slow circles. It stopped every time I stopped. Rachel couldn't hear it, said I was imagining things, that maybe it was the wind. But the wind doesn't follow your pace. The wind doesn't stop when you hold your breath. That night I couldn't sleep. The sound was closer, steady now, coming from somewhere behind the tree line. I tried not to move, not to breathe too loud. Eventually I sat up and saw through the mesh of the tent that same pale light again, flickering between the trees. I didn't wake Rachel. I just stared until it went out again. In the morning, I told her what I'd seen. She looked at me the way you look at someone who's scared of their own shadow. Sympathetic, but detached. Said I was probably exhausted. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But when we hiked out that day, I saw prints in the dirt behind our campsite. Bare footprints, small, almost childlike, leading into the woods. She said they'd probably been there before we arrived. I wanted to check, to follow them, but she just kept walking. We made it back to the trailhead the next evening, dirty, tired, barely speaking. Rachel drove us home in silence, hands gripping the wheel tight enough to turn her knuckles white. She didn't bring up what happened, and I didn't either. When I finally did, she laughed like it was a bad memory she'd already outgrown. Said it must have been the altitude, or the light, or my mind playing tricks. Maybe she's right. Maybe the mountains just got under my skin in a way they didn't get under hers. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that pale light again, hovering in the dark, patient and quiet, like it's waiting for me to admit it was real. And the worst part is, I think it was. Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
This all happened when I was a teenager. Well, not even a teenager yet, really. I was around 12, maybe 13. I'm not exactly sure, but it was somewhere in that range. I grew up in the city. I lived in Lakewood until I was about 11. And then my parents decided that staying there just wasn't sustainable anymore with what they were making. It had gotten too expensive, too demanding. And so we moved to where my grandparents were originally from, West Virginia. Right up against the Appalachian Mountains. Deep forest, real isolation. I hadn't really spent time in the mountains before that. Honestly, I barely even visited my grandparents growing up. And when I did, we almost never left the house. So going from a city environment to something that rural, that quiet, that cut off, it hit me hard. There wasn't the same group of kids I knew. My parents were more stressed than usual because of money, and I could feel it, even if they didn't say it out loud. It was one of those changes that just lands on you all at once, and you're expected to adapt without anyone really explaining what's going on. They didn't have much emotional bandwidth to walk me through it. I didn't feel close to my grandparents, didn't even really see them as part of my life. I didn't know the forest, didn't understand the risks, didn't know what to be careful about. So, yeah, it was rough. And it all happened right at that stage of life where everything inside you starts shifting. Hormones, emotions, identity, stuff you don't fully understand yet and don't really know how to talk about, even if you wanted to. All of that combined pushed me toward a group of kids from the area. The kind that were always looking for trouble. I think, looking back, it was my way of getting attention. Any kind of reaction from my parents, really. And what I'm about to tell you happened one night because of that. There was this one guy in the group, Caleb. He was probably the most reckless out of all of us. The kind of kid who always had to take things one step further, just to prove something. Once I started hanging around them, I realized there were all these stories people told about the forest, about the mountains. I didn't really believe most of it, but I was still a kid, and some of it got under my skin more than I'd like to admit. One of the ways we proved we weren't kids anymore, that we were tough, that we were real men, or whatever we thought that meant, was by pushing deeper into the mountains. Near where I still live today, there's this massive network of caves. Some natural, some clearly man-made. Just a lot of them, scattered through the area. And caves were always considered the worst. It's easy to get lost in them, really easy. You take one wrong turn and suddenly you can't find your way back out. On top of that, a lot of animals use them for shelter. And then there were the stories, things people swore lived in there. I never saw proof of that, but the stories were always there. And then there was the more realistic side of it. People who didn't exactly live by the rules, people on the margins, use those caves too. Not always for anything good. When I was younger, there were even groups using them to cook drugs, hiding out where no one would stumble across them by accident. So, yeah, not exactly the kind of place you go for fun. But Caleb started daring people to go with him, and I was the only one in the group who still had something to prove. I was the new kid, the easy target. They were always messing with me, and I felt it. Felt like I had to earn my place somehow. So I didn't hesitate. I said I wasn't scared, said I'd go. That same night, I waited until my parents went to sleep. Around 11:30, once the house was completely quiet, once I was sure my dad had taken his sleeping pills and my mom was out, I opened my bedroom window and slipped out as quietly as I could. I headed to where Caleb and I had agreed to meet. That alone should have been enough to make me turn back. The forest was pitch black, not just dark, dense. My flashlight barely cut through it. The beam felt weak, swallowed up almost immediately. And I could feel it building inside me. That kind of fear that doesn't come from a clear thought, just this steady pressure in your chest. Still, I kept going. I told myself I had to do this, that this was what it took to finally fit in. I started walking faster, trying to distract myself by making up little stories in my head, anything to avoid focusing on what was around me. When I finally saw Caleb in the distance, I felt this wave of relief. I didn't even like the guy much. Not then, not now. He still lives around here, and we still see each other sometimes, but there's always been something strange between us. I think whatever happened that night stripped away that whole tough kid image we both had, and neither of us really forgot that. But at that moment, seeing him standing there, I was just glad I wasn't alone anymore. From there, we started heading toward the cave. I had no idea where we were going. I just followed him. He kept saying he'd been there plenty of times, that I didn't need to worry, that everything would be fine. But then he'd switch it up, casually mention that he'd run into people inside before, which completely contradicted what he'd just said. Obviously, that didn't help. The last thing I wanted was to run into anyone down there. We kept walking until we reached the entrance, and I almost turned back right there. I was really scared. It was too dark, too quiet, and I had no idea where I was anymore. I wanted out, but that was the problem. I didn't know how to get back. I needed Caleb for that. He was the only one who knew the way. I asked him if he was sure we should go in. He just looked at me and asked if I was already getting scared, said it in this mocking tone that hit me right in the gut. And just like that, I felt it again, that need to prove something. I couldn't back out now, not in front of him. So I said, yeah, we could go in. We'd been inside the cave for maybe a minute when I started noticing something was different. Any light from outside, the moon, anything, was gone completely. That part made sense. What didn't make sense was the flashlight. It should have felt stronger in there. The darker the space, the more a light stands out, right? But it didn't. It was like the darkness had weight to it, like it absorbed the beam instead of letting it spread. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me. The walls were there, sure, wet, uneven rock, but if I pointed the light forward, all I saw was this narrow stretch of damp ground, and then nothing, just a tunnel that disappeared into black. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see beyond it. At that point, I had no idea how long we'd been inside the cave. I think in a way, I was so scared, like truly terrified, that I lost any sense of time, of distance, of what was actually happening around me. It all felt unreal. I'd never felt that kind of fear before, not even close. I remember grabbing Caleb and telling him, I want to go back. I want out of here now. And when I looked at him, I could see it on his face. He was just as scared as I was. I don't think he had ever actually been inside that cave before, at least not like that, not at night. Because the atmosphere in there was overwhelming. Heavy, like it was pressing down on you, making it harder to breathe, harder to think. Then, off to our right, there was a split in the cave. A narrow passage branching off, and we heard something. Without even thinking, both of us turned off our flashlights at the exact same time. It was almost instinctive. I can't even explain why we did that. Maybe a normal reaction would have been to point the light toward the sound, but somehow we both just knew there was something, or someone, there. And the last thing we wanted was to be seen. But what happened next was worse. I don't know if it was a person, but it had to be, right? It had to be. Still, the voice didn't sound right. It was rough, strained, like it was scraping its way out of someone's throat. Not natural, not normal. And yet, we understood it perfectly. It said, "Turning off the flashlight won't help. I see you better in the dark." We both just lost it, started screaming. No hesitation, no thinking, just pure panic. And honestly, I don't even know how to describe what came after. I feel like in any other situation, I might have just frozen or blacked out from fear. But the adrenaline hit so hard, and Caleb was yelling as much as I was, that we kind of fed off each other's panic and just ran. No plan and no clear direction, just ran until we saw the cave entrance again. And even after we got out, we didn't stop. We kept going, faster than I thought I was even capable of. Not looking back, not slowing down, just putting as much distance as possible between us and that place. We didn't stop until we were about halfway back, completely out of breath. I asked him if he was okay, what the hell that even was. He said he didn't know. Said maybe it was someone living in the caves, someone sleeping in there. But I could tell, he had no idea. We didn't have an explanation. We just knew what we heard, and that was enough. After we caught our breath, we kept moving. Faster this time, but more controlled. We didn't stop again until we reached my house, and we didn't even hesitate. We went straight to my window, climbed inside, and stayed in my room the rest of the night. We just sat there, talking in low voices, going over it again and again, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. The weirdest part is, Caleb was exactly the kind of person who would have told everyone. He would have turned it into a story, something to brag about, proof that we went through something intense and made it out. But that night, he was different. He was just as shaken as I was. And without really saying it outright, we both understood. We weren't going to talk about it, not to anyone. And we didn't. To this day, we've never brought it up again. I've talked about this with a few people over the years, and I'm pretty sure Caleb has too, but never anyone from back then. Never anyone from that circle. And never anyone who might actually believe that what we heard that night was anything more than just some drifter using the caves as a place to stay. Because that's the easy explanation, right? Someone living down there. Someone who didn't want to be found. But the truth is, the way it spoke didn't sound human. Not fully. Not the way a person's voice is supposed to carry, even in a place like that. And still, what else could it have been? There's no other explanation. Maybe if that happened to me now, as an adult, I'd react differently. Maybe I wouldn't panic the same way. Maybe I'd shine the flashlight straight at whoever, or whatever that was. Or maybe I wouldn't. I honestly don't know. All I know is that back then, it was the most terrifying moment of my life. And in some way, it stuck with me. Ever since that night, I've never been fully comfortable in the dark. I wouldn't say I'm outright afraid of it, but I can't do complete darkness anymore. I always need at least a little bit of light, just enough to make out shapes, outlines, something. I've always been someone who loves exploring caves. I know that, for most people, it probably sounds like a strange hobby, maybe even a little unsettling, and I get that. But I've never really had a genuine fear of tight spaces, or darkness, or any of the things people usually associate with caves. So for me, exploring them isn't stressful. It's something that actually brings me a real sense of excitement, even purpose. Over the years, I've met more and more people who feel the same way, people who are passionate about it, who genuinely love what they do. And because of that, I've been doing it more and more often. The story I'm about to tell you actually started with one of those people. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Appalachian Mountains almost feel like they exist in layers. There's the surface level, which is already unsettling on its own. You've probably heard that it's one of the regions in the US with a high number of disappearances and events that are, frankly, hard to explain. But beneath that, there's an entire underground system of caves. It's almost like a second mountain range, hidden below the first. These caves connect to each other through an enormous network of passages. So many, in fact, that fully mapping or exploring them is basically impossible. Most of the time, you don't even find the same cave twice. There's always something new, something different. I don't know how familiar you are with these cave systems, but just to give you some grounding, what runs beneath the Appalachian Mountains isn't just a scattering of isolated caverns. It's part of an immense karst landscape carved over hundreds of millions of years, where slightly acidic groundwater dissolved layers of limestone and left behind a labyrinth of tunnels, shafts, and hidden chambers that, in some regions, stretch for miles without interruption. Places like Mammoth Cave, the longest cave system ever mapped, are only the visible fraction of something much larger and far less understood. Because for every documented passage, there are countless others that collapse, flood, or simply vanish into tight, unmapped voids. Historically, these caves have served as shelter, burial sites, and even hideouts, which means there's a long record of human presence layered over the natural formation. But just as many accounts of people who entered and never came back out. Local folklore doesn't always agree on what's down there. Some stories talk about sounds that travel through stone in ways that don't make sense. Others describe figures glimpsed at the edge of lantern light, distorted by darkness, yet moving with intent. None of that has ever been substantiated in a scientific sense, of course. But what is documented, and far more unsettling, is how easily these environments can disorient even experienced explorers. The absence of natural light, the way sound bends and echoes, the constant humidity, the subtle depletion of oxygen in certain pockets. Down there, your senses don't just fail you, they begin to reinterpret reality. And that's often where the line between what's explainable and what isn't starts to blur. So about 3 years ago, I met a guy through one of these cave exploration groups. Not only did he share this interest, but for him, it was more than just a hobby. It eventually became his work. He studies cave-dwelling organisms, creatures that have adapted over time to survive in environments where darkness is absolute. Essentially, he's a biologist. Back when we first met, though, he hadn't fully gone down that path yet. Over those 3 years, we became pretty close. We talked often, and we even explored a few caves together. At some point, he told me he had bought a cabin in these mountains, in North Carolina, in an area with an incredibly dense concentration of caves. From what he had discovered so far, many of them were interconnected underground. He had been gradually exploring them, documenting what he found, signs that suggested something unusual might be present. Not human, but not entirely unlike humans either. Sometimes it was footprints, other times marks that didn't seem to have been made by animals. Almost like drawings, but hard to make sense of. Occasionally, he'd find animal remains near cave entrances, bones that suggested the animals had been killed and eaten inside the caves, even though they were species that lived outside, which implied something was bringing them in. He also became convinced that whatever was down there had some level of intelligence. He had tried setting up trail cameras at the cave entrances, hoping to capture something. But either the cameras would go missing and later turn up destroyed, or they would record nothing at all. And yet, whenever he went inside, there were clear signs of activity. As he kept exploring, he confirmed that there were multiple entry points, more than anyone had initially thought. But what really unsettled him happened about 9 months ago. He had tried bringing his dog with him to the cabin. He lives with his wife and 2 kids, but spends most of his time alone up there, and he thought the company might help. The dog was used to the outdoors, used to the mountains, to wildlife, so there was no reason to expect a problem. But the moment they got there, something was seriously wrong. The dog became extremely agitated, growling, barking constantly, especially at night. And then, at times, it would start whining in a way that sounded like it was in pain, even though nothing was physically happening to it. He even took the dog to the vet just to make sure everything was fine. But all it took was getting away from that cabin and those caves for the dog to go back to normal. After 2 days, he realized the dog was under too much stress and took it back home. After that, he started feeling uneasy. He couldn't explain it exactly, but he felt like there were more and more signs that whatever was in those caves was becoming aware of him, of his presence, and maybe even growing tired of it. He started to feel unsafe staying in that cabin alone, to the point where he had built multiple escape routes and safety measures into the structure itself. The place was practically designed like a maze, difficult for anyone to navigate from the outside, but carefully planned so he could get out quickly if something ever happened. Eventually, he decided to put together a group, people who could help him explore the caves in numbers. The idea was that we'd all feel safer that way. Honestly, I would have done it for free. This is something I genuinely love, and I wanted to be part of what he was doing. But he had money. Apparently, he had won some kind of award years back that set him up financially, and he insisted on funding the whole thing himself. The pay wasn't huge, but it was enough to bring people in. We ended up forming a solid group, 6 people at first, then 8. We made some basic modifications to the cabin ourselves, nothing fancy, just enough to expand the sleeping areas so all 8 of us could stay there comfortably. Then we got to work. And that's where the real horror begins. Or rather, it had begun a long time ago, probably millions of years back when these caves first formed. But this is the point where it becomes personal. Something I experienced, and something I wish I never had. This isn't an easy story, partly because it's more than just a story. This actually happened. 8 of us went into that cave, but only 6 came back out. And we still don't know what happened to the other two. This was very recent, still under investigation. There have been posters put up in the area, and a few local news outlets have mentioned the disappearances, but I can't share their names because of the ongoing case. At least, that's what I've been told. It all started one morning. We planned to begin early, not that it really mattered whether we started in the morning, afternoon, or at night. Once you pass a certain point inside those caves, there's no natural light at all, just total darkness. The kind where, if you turn off your flashlight and hold your hand right in front of your face, you still can't see it. There was absolutely nothing unusual about that day. We had already done this before. We had all been inside that cave. We had mapped out at least part of the entrance, and we knew there was a split further in. In fact, there were two branching paths not far from where we were, and we were standing in that exact area when one of us noticed what looked like a small hollow, a kind of recess that seemed to lead deeper into the cave. When we pointed our flashlights toward it, we saw something faintly reflective. It had a subtle sheen to it, something that could have easily been a mineral formation we hadn't documented yet. And since minerals can carry real economic value, we wanted to investigate further. Those two were the first to move forward. They stepped into that section of the cave. Not even 10 seconds later, Michael, who was third in line, was just about to follow them in when everything went wrong. We heard screaming. Then something grabbed him and pulled him downward. We barely had time to react. Instinct kicked in. We grabbed him, pulled him back with everything we had, and without even thinking, all of us started running. As fast as we could, straight back toward the entrance. Thankfully, getting out wasn't difficult. We had set up a rope system, a kind of safety line, to make sure we could navigate back quickly if anything happened. On top of that, we had placed light markers along the path to give us some additional visibility beyond our flashlights. Still, we ran like our lives depended on it. Because they did. Michael was practically being carried between us. And the moment we made it out, we didn't stop. We sprinted straight to the cabin, to the safest area we could think of, and immediately called the police and the park rangers. Michael was taken to the hospital. He had visible injuries on his leg, clear marks showing that something had grabbed him, hard enough to break skin through his pants. But here's the thing, those marks didn't match any known animal. If it had been a large predator, a mountain lion, a bear, something like that, the wounds would have been far worse. Deep punctures, tearing damage. These weren't like that. The impressions were human-like, as if someone had grabbed him with incredible force. The doctors confirmed that the pressure applied to his leg had been significant, far beyond what you'd expect from a normal human grip. And yet, the shape of the marks didn't align with claws. They didn't match any known predator. The area of the cave where this happened has already been investigated, thoroughly. And the only thing we've been told is that there were no traces of the two people who went in first. Nothing. No sign they were ever there. At one point, we ourselves became part of the investigation. There were questions, understandably so. But we're still in the process of being cleared. of proving that we had nothing to do with what happened. And I genuinely don't know what to think anymore. I know none of us were responsible. We were all outside that part of the cave when it happened, trying to pull Michael back. But the fact remains, something exerted a force on him that doesn't make sense. Another thing that was later confirmed to us is that there are no minerals in that part of the cave that reflect light in any meaningful way. So then, what exactly did we see? I've wondered if it could have been eyes reflecting the beam, but the truth is, I wasn't the one who saw the shimmer. So we have no way of knowing if that's even a possibility. But even if it were, wouldn't they have noticed? Wouldn't they have seen movement or something behaving differently from a static surface? I genuinely don't know what to make of it. I've gone over what was said so many times that it feels like my mind is starting to buckle under it. It lines up too closely with what my colleague had been finding. Those signs of intelligence, those indications that something down there might be aware, might be deliberate in how it moves, how it hides. Something that lives in those caves and something that doesn't want to be seen. And I have a feeling that when the investigation is finally made public, we're going to be told that it was just an animal, that they were taken by something known, something explainable. But none of us believe that. This all happened many years ago. In truth, it began long before I was even born, though I had no idea at the time. I only started to understand any of it when I was around 18 or 20. I'll try to tell it from the beginning in a way that makes sense, even though what I'm about to share is essentially the work of my life, something my mother dedicated herself to as well, and there's no way I can fit every detail into a single telling like this. Still, I'll do my best to give you a clear sense of how everything unfolded. To start with, my childhood was shaped by a tense and complicated relationship between my parents. I was born about 47 years ago, and back then, especially in more rural areas near the Smoky Mountains, expectations were different. People valued tradition, and most believed in a very specific idea of what a family should look like. My mother never fit that mold. She wanted to work, to have interests of her own, to exist as more than just someone's wife or someone's mother. She wanted a life that didn't begin and end with my father and me. My father, on the other hand, wanted the opposite. He wanted a woman who stayed home, who cooked, who revolved entirely around him while he was the one out earning money. My mother never accepted that role, and it caused constant friction between them. To be honest, I never liked my father. He was controlling, obsessive, and completely unequipped to handle his own emotions. He couldn't regulate himself, and that had a lasting impact on me growing up. Years later, I found my mother's journals, and through them, I learned what it actually means to be yourself, and to fight for that. But at the time, all I knew was that something in our home always felt wrong. All of that tension led to what happened when I was 14. One day, my mother disappeared. She walked out of the house and never came back. My father told everyone in our town that she had run off, that she didn't care about us, that she chose her own life over her family. That became the official story. To everyone else, she was a woman who abandoned her child and left without looking back. But I never believed it. From the moment she was gone, I felt it in a way I can't fully explain. It didn't feel like she had left. It felt like I had lost her completely, like something had taken her away from me in a final, irreversible way. I spent years trying to get someone to take me seriously, going to the police, insisting something was wrong. I was 14, and they treated me like a joke. They told me my mother was unstable, that I should move on, that I should focus on building a life that didn't look anything like hers. They would tell me, very specifically, that the purpose of my life should be to control my wife better than my father had. First, to choose the right woman, and then to keep her under control. Those kinds of remarks always made my stomach turn. Those words stayed with me, and not in a good way. Still, I never let go of that feeling that something terrible had happened. When I turned 18, my father suffered a serious health crisis and became bedridden. Suddenly, I was the one taking care of him, managing the house, going through rooms and spaces I had never really been allowed to touch before. It was during that time that I found what he had missed, things that belonged to my mother, items he hadn't managed to destroy. He had burned or thrown away almost everything, but not all of it. Among those remnants, I found a map. There was a marked location deep in the forest, not too far from where we lived, but far enough to feel completely cut off from everything. I don't remember exactly when I started putting the pieces together, whether I was 18 or closer to 20, but I do remember the moment I decided I had to go there. Following that map as precisely as I could, I found it. A cabin, worn down by time, hidden among the trees as if it had been swallowed by the forest itself. The moment I saw it, something shifted in me. I can't explain it properly. It was a feeling that didn't belong to logic, something immediate and certain. A strange, quiet sense of recognition settled over me, and I knew, without any doubt, that this place had belonged to my mother. I also knew my father had no idea it existed. If he had, he would have destroyed it like he destroyed everything else. The cabin was locked, and from that point on, I became fixated on getting inside. I searched for keys, for documents, for anything that would give me access. If I had to, I was prepared to force it open or find a legal way to claim it, because I was certain that whatever was inside belonged to her, and by extension, to me. My father couldn't stop me anymore. He was confined to his bed. And for the first time, I had the freedom to act without his interference. For days, I tore through the house, searching obsessively until I found something I had never noticed before: a narrow slit hidden within a wall. Inside it, there was a key and a letter. I have never read anything that hurt me and healed me at the same time the way that letter did. It was from my mother. She wrote that she loved me more than anything, and that if something ever happened to her, there were only two possibilities. Either I would need to go to the cabin and find the answers myself, or my father had been responsible for whatever had happened. I had already suspected that he might be capable of hurting her. He had become aggressive over the years, unpredictable, quick to lash out. Anger was the only way he knew how to respond to anything, and it often spilled onto the people around him. Reading that letter confirmed what I had felt all along. My mother hadn't simply disappeared. Something had happened to her, and deep down, I understood that she was probably already gone. The key in my hand felt heavy with meaning, and I knew immediately what it was for. That same day, actually, that same night, I left the house. It wasn't the smartest decision. The forest at night is not a place you wander into lightly, especially in the Appalachian region, where there are things people don't fully understand and never really talk about openly. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was driven by something stronger than caution, and I made it there without incident. Once inside, I stayed in that cabin for 2 days. I barely ate, surviving on what little I had brought with me. Before leaving, I asked my neighbor to keep an eye on my father, to make sure he had water and the meals I had already prepared for him, all the while feeling this pull, this urge to stay at that cabin. I went through everything, every paper, every object, every trace of my mother's presence. The cabin wasn't just a place to live. It was something else entirely. It was part office, part laboratory. And whatever my mother had been working on, it was far more serious than anything I could have imagined. I always knew my mother was deeply drawn to science. She had a natural curiosity for biology, geology, for the natural world as a whole, even though she was never given a real opportunity to pursue an academic path, let alone study much beyond elementary school. Everything she had built in that cabin, every book, every note, every sample, came from her own effort, her own discipline, her own quiet determination to learn without anyone's help. What I found there changed the way I saw her completely. She had mapped out a network of caves, an entire underground system. Hand-drawn with incredible precision, each tunnel carefully traced, each chamber marked as if she had spent years studying it. The level of detail was astonishing, and it didn't look like guesswork. It looked like documentation. Alongside those maps, she had collected minerals, samples she had clearly taken from inside those caves. And then there were the drawings. Creatures. I still struggle to describe them properly. She had sketched them in detail and written notes beside each one, since she had no way of photographing them. According to her descriptions, they were pale to the point of being almost white, with little to no functional vision. She believed they relied on sound and movement, reacting to vibrations more than anything visual. The noises they made resembled some form of echolocation, like they were communicating or navigating through sound rather than sight. What unsettled me most wasn't just how they looked, but how she described their behavior. She didn't present them as mindless or purely predatory. She wrote about them as if they had structure, awareness, even a kind of restraint. According to her notes, they weren't inherently aggressive beyond basic survival. She believed that if their environment was respected, if humans kept their distance and didn't disturb their habitat, there could be coexistence. She even mentioned leaving small offerings near certain cave entrances and claimed that doing so seemed to reduce signs of disturbance. At the time, I didn't know what to think. Part of me believed she had lost her grip on reality. Another part wondered if she had stumbled onto something far beyond anything I could comprehend. And then there was the simplest explanation. That it was all imagination, an elaborate narrative she had built for herself in isolation. I didn't have the answers, and if I'm being honest, I wasn't eager to go looking for them. For months, I did nothing. The images she had drawn stayed with me. The way she described their size, their strength, the fact that they were taller than us, stronger than us, adapted to an environment we barely understood. It was enough to keep me away. I had responsibilities. I was in my early 20s, trying to build a life, taking care of my father who was already bedridden by then. Whether he deserved it or not didn't matter to me at the time. He was still my father, and I felt obligated to stay. So I kept visiting the cabin, but only to feel closer to her. I never went into the caves. That changed years later. Around my early 30s, something shifted. Maybe it was time, maybe it was frustration, or maybe it was the need to finally confront whatever truth had been left behind. I started going into the caves, slowly at first, never too far, always careful. But I found nothing, no signs of anything unusual, nothing that matched what she had described. And little by little, I convinced myself that it had all been in her head. Until the day I found her. I believe it was her body. Even now, saying that feels unreal. It was one of the most painful moments of my life, but at the same time, it gave me something I had been searching for since I was 14. Certainty. She hadn't abandoned me. She hadn't walked away. She had died out there, around the time she disappeared. And my father had spent years turning her into something she wasn't, while everyone else chose to believe him. What followed happened quickly. The authorities were called, and an investigation began. At first, everything was handled with care. They explained things to me, kept me informed, treated me like I had a right to know. And then, 5 days later, everything changed. The FBI got involved. They took control of everything. The cabin was sealed off, declared part of an ongoing investigation. I was shut out completely. I no longer have access to it, to anything inside, to anything that belonged to my mother, which by every right should now belong to me. I've filed paperwork, hired a lawyer, spent money I don't have, not because I want the property back, but because I want answers. I want to be part of the investigation. I want to understand what happened to her. She's been erased. No one tells me anything. No updates, no explanations, nothing. And then I go home, and my father is still there, still bedridden, still shouting the same things over and over again. That she left us, that she didn't care, that she was worthless. No matter how many times I tell him the truth, that she died, that she was more than he ever allowed her to be, he just keeps repeating it like none of this ever happened. My life has become something I don't recognize anymore. All I want is to reclaim what was hers, to understand what she found, to know the truth. But they won't let me anywhere near it. And the more time passes, the more I start to believe that what she described wasn't fiction. That something does exist in those caves, something real, something that they don't want anyone else to find. Because if she was right, if those creatures were capable of coexistence, if they only reacted when disturbed, then why all the secrecy? Why shut me out completely? And the worst part is the thought that this might never end. That I'll spend the rest of my life chasing something I'm not allowed to reach. and that one day I'll die without ever knowing what truly happened to her.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
I've lived in California my whole life. I grew up there, built my routine there, and for a long time I had this idea that eventually I'd leave, move somewhere quieter, more remote, somewhere that matched my personality a bit better. I've always been pretty introspective, the kind of person who actually enjoys being alone for long stretches of time. The problem is, I learned the hard way, twice actually, that there's a difference between liking isolation and depending on it. Both times I tried to move somewhere truly remote, I ended up realizing the same thing. I need the city. Not for the noise or the people, but for the safety of knowing that if something goes wrong, I'm not completely on my own. So over time, I figured out a balance that worked for me. I stayed in the city, kept my job, kept my routine, but every couple of months, whenever I could manage it, I'd disappear for a week into the mountains somewhere. That became my reset. Usually, I'd go to the same place. There was a cabin I knew well, somewhere I trusted, and I'll admit I got a bit possessive over it. Not in a literal sense, but it was mine in the way that matters. I knew the layout, I knew the area, I knew what to expect, and when you're spending time in remote places, that kind of predictability matters more than people think. There are 1,000 things that can go wrong out there, and familiarity takes a bit of that edge off. But this time, that option wasn't available. The owner told me one of the pipes had burst, and since the cabin was technically off-grid, but still had systems for hot water, internet, all the things that make it comfortable, it needed repairs. He said it wouldn't be ready in time. At the time, I took it as some kind of sign, like maybe I should switch things up a bit, go somewhere new, instead of repeating the same trip again. A few years back, I had traveled through the Great Smoky Mountains with a close friend, and I remembered how much I liked that area. The landscape, the atmosphere, the way everything felt just a little more raw and untouched. It's part of the Appalachian Mountains, and something about that region stuck with me. So I figured this was the perfect excuse to go back. I found a cabin online, read through the reviews, everything seemed solid. The owner was easy to talk to, very friendly. Funny enough, he actually lived in the same area of California as I did. At the time, I didn't think much of it, just another coincidence that made the whole thing feel like it was lining up the way it should. Looking back now, I think that's the part that bothers me the most. How right it all felt at the beginning. I booked the week and spent the days leading up to it, working non-stop, just counting down until I could leave. When the day finally came, I packed up, got in the car, and started the drive. It wasn't a short trip, but it was a beautiful one. The kind of drive where you actually don't mind taking your time. There were stretches that got a bit dangerous, sharp turns, steep drops, areas where animals could cross at any moment. But I've always been careful with that. The idea of hitting an animal has always bothered me more than anything else, so I slowed down when I needed to. Paid attention, took my time. It meant getting there later than I could have. But I didn't mind. By the time I arrived, I was in a genuinely good mood. The cabin itself looked even better than I expected. Clean, well-kept, comfortable without losing that rustic feel. I remember texting the owner right away, telling him how happy I was with it, that it absolutely lived up to what I'd paid for. I even texted my mom, half joking, but also kind of serious, saying I might have found a new go-to spot and that my parents should try it sometime because I knew they'd enjoy it too. After that, I put my phone away and decided to make the most of the daylight. I went out for a few hikes, explored some nearby spots I had marked earlier. The trails were a bit demanding, but nothing I wasn't used to. By the time I got back near sunset, I was tired in that good way, the kind that comes from actually doing something physical. I grabbed some firewood before heading inside, knowing the temperature would drop once night set in. That contrast, cold outside, warmth inside, is something I've always loved. There's something about sitting in front of a fireplace that just settles everything down for me. So I got the fire going, took my time making a proper meal, nothing rushed, and by the time I sat down to eat, I was completely relaxed, full, warm, comfortable. Exactly what I had come there for. At some point, I stretched out on the couch. The fire going, TV on in the background, and I must have drifted off without even realizing it. I woke up suddenly. It wasn't midnight yet. I remember checking the time later, but what woke me felt real enough that I sat up immediately. It sounded like a phone ringing somewhere inside the cabin. Not mine, at least not the tone I use, but clearly a phone. It rang twice, maybe 3 times, then stopped. For a second, I was convinced it had been mine. But when I fully came to, there was nothing. No sound, no vibration, no missed call. Just silence. And I sat there, trying to make sense of it. I've had vivid dreams before, the kind that feel real enough to carry over into waking up. So my first instinct was to assume it had been that. Just a dream bleeding into reality for a second. Still, I didn't completely ignore it. I got up, did a quick check around the cabin. Nothing thorough, just enough to reassure myself. I even considered the possibility that maybe a previous guest had left a phone behind somewhere, but that didn't really add up either. The ringing had been too brief, too intentional. Still, nothing seemed out of place, so I let it go. I decided to call it a night, went upstairs, closed the bedroom door. I always sleep with it closed, and got into bed. I was still tired, so I fell asleep pretty quickly. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight hitting my face through the window. And that's something I've always liked, sleeping with the windows open, especially in places like that. It's one of the reasons I usually pick cabins with more than one floor, so I can sleep upstairs, feel a bit more exposed to the outside without actually being exposed. At least, that's what I thought. I woke up with the sunlight hitting my face, and for a few seconds, everything felt exactly the way I wanted it to feel. Calm, quiet, almost too perfect. I remember just lying there, letting that warmth sit on my skin, thinking that maybe this trip had been exactly what I needed after all. It's strange how quickly that kind of feeling can disappear. I rolled over, still half asleep, and looked toward the bedroom door. And that's when everything shifted. The door was open. It wasn't wide open, just enough to immediately feel wrong. And the reaction I had wasn't logical, it was physical. It felt like something in my chest tightened instantly, like my body reacted before my brain had time to catch up. I rarely wake up during the night, especially not in a place like that, where I was already exhausted from the drive and the hiking. I fall asleep and I stay asleep. And I knew with absolute certainty that I had closed that door before going to bed. Still, I didn't have proof, and that's the worst part about moments like these. Your brain immediately starts trying to calm you down, to come up with explanations that make more sense than the obvious one you don't want to accept. Maybe I got up in the middle of the night without remembering. Maybe I didn't close it all the way. Maybe it just looked closed and wasn't. But then that sound from the night before crept back into my mind. That phone ringing. Clear as anything, even if it had stopped almost immediately. And suddenly, it wasn't just one thing anymore. It was two things that didn't line up. I got out of bed and forced myself into a routine, mostly because I didn't know what else to do. I took a shower, hoping it would wake me up enough to shake off that feeling, to ground myself a bit. And for a moment, it worked. The hot water, the familiarity of something normal, it helped, until it didn't. I heard something. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was enough. It sounded like movement somewhere else in the cabin. Not something falling, not something random, something deliberate. A door, maybe. And that's when the situation stopped feeling like overthinking. I stepped out of the bathroom and immediately noticed the bedroom door again. This time, it was closed. That was it. That was the moment everything clicked into place in the worst possible way. I had gone to sleep with it closed, woken up with it open, and now it was closed again. There was no version of that sequence that made sense if I was alone. I remember just standing there for a second, completely still, listening, trying to catch any sound that would confirm what I was already starting to believe. For some reason, I still don't fully understand. My first instinct was to check under the bed. Maybe because it's such an obvious place that you almost expect it to be empty. Maybe because part of me still hoped this was all nothing. I got down slowly, trying not to make too much noise, and looked underneath. And that's when I saw it. Right near the head of the bed, pushed up against the wall, there was a blanket. Not like something that had fallen, like something that had been used, tucked, shifted, disturbed in a way that felt intentional. And I didn't need to see anything else. I didn't need movement. I didn't need a face. I didn't need confirmation. My brain filled in the rest instantly. Someone had been under there. Whether they had been sleeping, hiding, watching, I don't know. But the idea that I had been lying right above someone, completely unaware, while they were close enough to hear me breathe, that's something I can't really describe properly. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, something that made my whole body feel weak for a second, like I couldn't fully process what I was realizing. After that, everything I did was automatic. I grabbed whatever I could as fast as I could, not even thinking about what I was leaving behind. I called the police while moving, barely able to explain properly what was happening, just giving them the location and telling them there was someone inside the cabin with me. I remember them asking me to stay on the line, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I shoved my phone into my pocket and focused on getting out. I didn't check the rest of the cabin. I didn't try to confirm anything else. I didn't want to see more. I just needed distance between me and that place. I got outside, ran to the car, got in, and drove. I don't even remember if I locked the cabin door. At that point, it didn't matter. I told the police where I was, that I was safe, and that they should still go check the property. The owner was contacted as well, and later I found out he actually made the trip out there himself. When I saw him, I could tell right away he had no idea what had happened. He looked just as shaken as I felt, which ruled out the one theory I had been clinging to, that maybe this was somehow connected to him. The police searched the cabin. They didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry, no clear evidence of someone being there, nothing that could give a concrete explanation. Just like that, it turned into one of those situations where you're left with more questions than answers and no real way to get closure. I never found out who was in that cabin, or why they were there, or how long they had been there before I even arrived. What I do know is that it changed something in me permanently. I don't look at places the same way anymore, especially places that feel isolated and quiet in a way that used to comfort me. And beds, especially ones with space underneath. I can't deal with them anymore. I check every single time. Even when I know there's nothing there, even when it doesn't make sense, I still check. Because once you've had that thought that someone could be right there, hidden in the one place you feel the most vulnerable, it doesn't really go away. This happened about 5 years ago, at a time when I really needed to get away for a while and clear my head. And if I'm being completely honest, my wife and I weren't in the best place either. It wasn't anything dramatic or explosive, nothing like that. It was more the kind of slow tension that builds up when two people spend too much time together without any real space to breathe, where even the smallest thing can turn into an argument simply because you're both already worn down. We both knew the relationship itself was solid, that it had something real underneath all of that. But we also knew we needed distance, not emotionally, just physically. Time to reset, to think clearly again, to stop reacting to every little thing like it mattered more than it actually did. So we came up with what felt like a reasonable plan at the time. We had already booked a cabin out in the Blue Ridge Mountains for a week. Nothing fancy, just something affordable that fit within what we could spend, and we figured we could turn that into something useful for both of us. The idea was simple. We'd each take an extra week off before the actual trip. I would head out there first on my own, and she would stay back at home and have the space to herself. That way we'd both get what we needed. A bit of quiet, a bit of distance. And then after that week, she'd join me at the cabin, and we'd spend the second week together, hopefully in a much better place. It made sense, at least on paper. So when the time came, that's exactly what we did. I packed my things, said goodbye to her, kissed her before I left, and we agreed that in about a week, we'd meet again at the cabin. I'd even planned to hike out a bit to meet her when she arrived, just to make it feel like something different, something a little more intentional. The drive there was actually really pleasant. One of those long, quiet drives where you start to feel like you're already disconnecting from everything you left behind. And by the time I got close, I genuinely felt like this might be exactly what we both needed. That feeling didn't last very long once I actually got there. We already knew the cabin wasn't going to be anything special. We hadn't paid much for it, so I wasn't expecting luxury or anything close to it. But the moment I stepped inside, there were things that immediately didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just that it felt old or a little neglected. It was more about how exposed it felt. The front door didn't seem particularly sturdy, like it would hold up if someone really tried to force it open. And what bothered me even more was the windows. There were no shutters, no curtains, nothing at all that would block the view from the outside. Just glass. Which meant that at night, if I had the lights on inside, anyone out there could see me clearly. Every movement, every detail, while I wouldn't be able to see anything beyond my own reflection. That kind of imbalance, that feeling of being visible without being able to see who might be looking, it got under my skin almost immediately. I actually considered leaving right then and there, just turning around and going back. But we had signed one of those non-refundable agreements before booking, something I didn't think much about at the time, but suddenly felt a lot more real standing there inside that place. We had already spent part of our vacation money on it, and I didn't want to waste that, especially when the whole point of this trip was to step away and reset. So, I told myself I'd give it a couple of days, 2 or 3 at most, see how I felt, and then decide. Maybe it would just take some getting used to. That first night was uncomfortable in a way that's hard to fully explain. I've always been the kind of person who enjoys walking at night. I don't really get bothered by the dark, and the forest itself has never scared me in that way. But I do value privacy, and more than that, I don't like the idea of being watched without knowing who or what is watching me. Still, I tried to act normal. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and went for a short walk just to settle in, to get a feel for the place. But something felt off almost immediately, and I couldn't tell if it was just me, if it was the stress I had already built up because of the cabin, or if there was actually something about that place that didn't feel right. I remember feeling tense, more aware of my surroundings than usual, like my body had already decided something was wrong before my mind had caught up. That wasn't normal for me. I'm not particularly intuitive. My wife is much more like that than I am. She picks up on things quickly, trusts her instincts, and if she had been there with me, I honestly don't think she would have stayed a single night. She would have felt it immediately and left. To distract myself, or maybe just to feel a little less alone, I decided to call her while I was walking, just to check in, see how her day had been, keep things normal between us. But as we talked, and as I started explaining what the cabin was like, how exposed it felt, how there were no shutters or curtains, and how isolated the area really was, I could hear the concern in her voice right away. She didn't like it, not at all. She even suggested that maybe we should look into renting a different cabin nearby, something more secure, and that I could go check it out the next day, see if it felt better, safer, and if it did, she'd book it without hesitation. She made it clear she didn't mind spending a bit more if it meant we'd both feel comfortable there. And the longer I stayed on the phone with her, the stranger I started to feel. Not just uneasy, but exposed in a way that didn't make sense given how isolated the place was. I caught myself lowering my voice without realizing it, almost whispering at certain points, like there was someone nearby who shouldn't hear what I was saying, even though logically there shouldn't have been anyone around for miles. It was instinctive, not something I chose to do, and that's what made it worse. When I finally hung up, the silence felt heavier than before. And that's when I heard it. It came from my left. Not footsteps, nothing that clearly pointed to a person. Just this rough, dragging sound against wood, like something had slipped and tried to catch itself. Like fingernails scraping against the surface of a tree trunk as whatever was holding on lost its grip for a second. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. I don't think I can explain that moment any better than this, but whatever I felt right then, it was enough to make me turn around without thinking twice and start walking back toward the cabin as fast as I could without outright running. I've spent plenty of nights in the woods before. I'm used to isolation, to silence, to the kind of darkness that settles in once the sun is completely gone. But there's something very different about knowing you can step inside somewhere solid, close the door, shut the windows, and feel like whatever is out there stays out there. That sense of separation, that barrier, it matters more than people realize until it's gone. And in that cabin, I didn't feel any of that. The moment I got back inside and closed the door, I felt it again, how weak it was, how little it would actually take for someone to force their way in if they wanted to. And instead of feeling safer, I just felt trapped in a slightly smaller space. I didn't turn on the lights. I couldn't. If I did, I knew I wouldn't be able to see anything outside. And at least in the dark, I had the same chance of seeing something as anything out there had of seeing me. So I stayed in the dark. I moved slowly from window to window, keeping myself low, trying to look out without being too visible, scanning the tree line, the bushes, anything that might give me a sign that I wasn't alone out there. I don't know if describing it like this really does it justice, but those were some of the most unsettling minutes I've ever experienced. There's something deeply wrong about standing in complete darkness, surrounded by nothing, convinced something might be out there, and having absolutely no way to confirm it. I stayed like that for maybe 20 minutes, maybe a little more. Time felt stretched in a strange way. And at one point, at one of the windows, I thought I saw movement. Not clearly, not something I could point to and say with certainty. Just a shift among the bushes near the side of the cabin, subtle enough that I immediately started questioning whether I had actually seen anything at all, or if my mind was just filling in the gaps. That's where it got worse, because at that point, I didn't know what to trust anymore. Part of me felt like I was overreacting, that I was letting the discomfort of the cabin get to me, turning a normal situation into something it wasn't, ruining what was supposed to be a break, a reset. But another part of me kept pushing back, telling me that dismissing it too quickly could be just as dangerous. that if something was actually out there, pretending it wasn't wouldn't make it go away. It would just leave me unprepared. I knew exactly what my wife would have done in that situation. She would have chosen caution without hesitation. She would have rather been wrong and safe than right and in danger. Eventually, after sitting with it long enough, after not seeing anything clearly, not hearing anything else that I could point to, I convinced myself, at least enough to move forward, that I might be exaggerating it, that maybe there was nothing there. So I turned the lights on, and instantly everything outside disappeared. The glass turned into a mirror, reflecting the inside of the cabin back at me, leaving nothing but darkness beyond it. It didn't matter if something was standing just a few feet away from the window. I wouldn't have been able to see it. That's how dark it gets out there once the night fully sets in. There's no ambient light, nothing to help your eyes adjust. That night, I did what I could to feel even slightly safer. I dragged 2 chairs and wedged them under the door handle, knowing it wouldn't stop anyone determined, but at least it would make noise, enough to wake me up if someone tried to get in. After that, I went to bed, or at least I tried to. Falling asleep wasn't easy. The thought kept coming back over and over that someone could be standing just outside the cabin, watching, seeing everything while I had no way of knowing they were there. Even the bedroom didn't help. The cabin sat low to the ground. The windows were at a level where anyone outside would have a clear view in. The only solution I found was in the closet, where there were 2 old blankets. I used both of them to cover the windows completely, blocking the view from outside. It meant I was colder than I would have liked. The nights still had that early spring chill to them, but I preferred that over feeling exposed. I did sleep, eventually, but it wasn't restful. It was the kind of sleep where you never fully let go, where every small sound pulls you halfway back to being awake. By the time morning came, I had already made my decision. I wasn't staying there another night. I was leaving, no question about it. What I wasn't prepared for was what I saw when I pulled the blankets down from the windows. The outside of the glass, especially the one by the bedroom, was covered in handprints. Not just 1 or 2, dozens, smudged, overlapping, as if someone had been pressing their hands against the glass again and again, trying to see through it, trying to understand why they couldn't see inside. The way they were placed, the height, the repetition, it was clear that whoever had been out there had spent time at that window, watching and waiting. That was it for me. Any doubt I had disappeared in that moment. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been out there while I was walking, while I was inside, while I was trying to convince myself everything was fine. I packed as fast as I could, not caring about organization, just grabbing what mattered and throwing it together. I stepped outside and went straight for the car, moving as fast as I could without looking back. By the time I got there, I was out of breath, more from the adrenaline than anything else. But I got in, locked the doors, and started driving. I didn't call my wife right away. It took me about 20 minutes on the road before I felt far enough away to even think clearly. When I finally did call her, I told her everything. I told her I wasn't just uncomfortable staying in that cabin, I didn't even want to be anywhere near it. the idea of switching to another place nearby wasn't an option anymore. Whatever that was, whoever that was, I didn't want to risk being within reach of it again. I had a few theories, none of them good. Either it was someone who knew that cabin existed and used it to watch whoever stayed there, which is disturbing enough on its own, or it was someone who just happened to come across it, which I doubt, because there were too many coincidences for that to make sense. The one that stuck with me the most, the one I couldn't shake, was that it might have been the owner. That the lack of shutters, the lack of privacy, wasn't negligence, it was intentional. That they rented it out knowing exactly what it allowed them to do. I reported it to the police, but they told me there wasn't much they could do. No direct threat had been made, no physical harm had come to me, so there was nothing concrete to act on. One of the officers suggested I try to get a refund, maybe warn people online, share my experience. That was 5 years ago. I know for a fact that at least one other couple rented that same cabin after me and left early, saying they felt watched, unsafe, just like I did. Beyond that, I don't know how many more people have stayed there or how often this happens. What I do know is this. If you ever find yourself in a situation like that, don't try to rationalize it. Don't try to push through it just because you've already paid or because you think you might be overreacting. Trust what you feel. No amount of money is worth your safety. And no place is worth staying in if it makes you feel like you're not alone when you should be. About 5 years ago, I went through one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It's one of those situations I never really got answers for, and if I'm being honest, I didn't go looking for them either. There was a part of me that felt like digging deeper would only put me in more danger, like some things are better left exactly where they are. At the time, I had just started seeing someone. We'd been talking for about 3 months, and for most of that time, I genuinely believed we were building something real. About a week before all of this happened, we had finally made things official. And to celebrate, he suggested we spend some time away together. He told me about this cabin deep in the woods that used to belong to his uncle, who had passed away and left it to him. He said he'd had it for around 5 years, and that it was a place he went to often, somewhere he felt at peace. The way he described it made it sound quiet, private, almost like a little escape from the world, and he asked if I wanted to go with him for a week. Before I go any further, I want to say something because I've told this story before, and I already know how people react. There's always that tendency to look back and point out what I should have noticed, what I should have questioned, how I should have known better. But the truth is, normal people don't go through life assuming everything is a threat. You don't analyze every word, every gesture, every invitation like it's dangerous. You trust, you interpret things in good faith, and sometimes that puts you in situations you don't fully understand until you're already in them. That doesn't make it your fault. So, yes, maybe I could have paid more attention. Maybe I could have said no. Maybe I could have reacted differently. But I didn't, and that doesn't make what happened my responsibility. At the time, the way he suggested the trip felt almost romantic in a very simple, unforced way. He made it sound like something special, like it meant something to him to bring me there. There was a moment where he started with that typical line, I don't usually bring people here. This place is personal to me, that kind of thing. And I remember feeling slightly uncomfortable, like it was a bit too rehearsed. It didn't feel completely natural, but I brushed it off. I figured maybe he was just nervous or trying to impress me in his own awkward way. People do that. They exaggerate. They dramatize things a little, especially early on. So, I didn't push it. I told him it was fine, that I'd love to go, and even joked that I could help him fix the place up a bit while we were there, give it a more lived-in feel. He seemed to like that idea. The moment we arrived, though, something felt off, and it hit me immediately. The smell was the first thing. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't something you could ignore or get used to slowly. It was strong, invasive, almost physical. My body reacted before I could even process it properly. It wasn't just unpleasant, it felt wrong. The closest thing I can compare it to is the smell of something dead. But even that doesn't fully capture it. There was something about it that triggered a kind of instinctive alarm, like my body was trying to tell me to leave before my brain had caught up. He noticed my reaction right away and was quick to explain it. He said that in areas like that, it wasn't unusual. Animals die in the woods all the time. Sometimes they get trapped. Sometimes they end up under structures, and the smell can linger. He said it so casually, so matter of fact, that for a second I questioned myself instead of him. I'm not someone who grew up around forests. I'm a city person. I don't have that kind of reference. So I told myself maybe this was normal, maybe I just wasn't used to it. We even tried to figure out where it was coming from. We walked around the cabin, checked different corners, different rooms. But the smell didn't seem localized. It was just everywhere, like it had settled into the place itself. Eventually, we just assumed it was coming from outside, and that the wind was carrying it in. He even mentioned that he'd spent so much time there that he barely noticed it anymore, which, at the time, I tried to accept. But deep down, it didn't sit right. That kind of smell doesn't just become background noise. Not like that. I remember telling him I was glad I'd brought perfume, because there were moments where it genuinely made me feel nauseous. I even asked if maybe we should consider leaving, finding somewhere else, because I didn't think I could handle a whole week like that. That's when his tone changed. It wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. He went from calm and reassuring to irritated, almost defensive. He said I was overreacting, that I was acting like a child, that this was a normal thing, and if I wasn't comfortable, maybe I shouldn't have come at all. There was something sharp in the way he said it. Something that caught me off guard. It felt mean. And I remember thinking, maybe I'm the one being unfair. Maybe I showed up to his place and immediately started complaining. Maybe I was being ungrateful. So I tried to dial it back. Told myself I just needed a day or two to adjust, that the smell would fade or I'd get used to it. But that first night was awful. He fell asleep almost instantly, completely undisturbed, while I spent hours going back and forth to the bathroom, spraying perfume, even showering in the middle of the night, because I felt like the smell was clinging to my skin. It made me feel physically dirty in a way I can't fully explain. The next morning, I told him again that I wasn't comfortable. that maybe we should leave early. I asked if there was any way to call someone, get a ride, anything. That's when he told me there was no signal out there, that they hadn't come with any intention of staying connected, that the whole point was to be off the grid, just the two of us. And again, the way he said it wasn't gentle. It felt like he was already losing patience with me. He said he was tired of hearing me complain, that I was ruining the experience over something stupid, and that if I wanted, I could go for a walk and clear my head. He said that's what he was going to do, go out for a while, and that I could either come with him or stay behind. Something about the way he spoke to me in that moment really got to me. Not just what he said, but how he said it. It felt dismissive, almost cold. I was upset, and instead of thinking it through, I reacted. I told him to go, that I'd stay. And that's when I noticed it. That brief hesitation. It was subtle, but it was there. Like he didn't fully expect that answer. Like he actually wanted me to go with him. For a second, it felt like he was reconsidering, like he was about to insist. But then he just said, "Fine," and left. 3 months into a relationship is nothing. That's still supposed to be the easy phase, where everything feels light, where people are on their best behavior. And at that point, I remember thinking very clearly, the moment I get out of here, this is over. Whatever this was, it wasn't something I wanted to be part of. But at the same time, I was aware of the situation I was in. I didn't know where I was exactly. I didn't know how to navigate the forest. I had no signal, no way to contact anyone. I was completely dependent on the person I had just decided I didn't trust. So, I made a decision. I would play along. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't escalate anything. I'd wait until we left, and then I'd walk away from the relationship safely. It wasn't about being dishonest. It was about protecting myself. Because the reality is, you hear too many stories of situations turning dangerous the moment someone feels rejected. And I wasn't willing to take that risk. I stood there, watching him walk away into the trees, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I felt completely alone. For about 20 minutes after he left, I just sat there on the couch, completely still, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. My mind kept going in circles, running through options, but none of them felt real or possible. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how far the nearest road was. I didn't even know which direction I would need to go if I tried to leave on my own. But at the same time, sitting there doing nothing didn't feel right either. So I convinced myself to at least try to understand the smell, to prove, one way or another, whether I had been overreacting or not. Part of me still wanted to believe he was right, that this was something explainable, something normal that I just wasn't used to. I started inside the cabin first, checking every room, every corner, looking for anything that could explain it. A small animal, something trapped, anything. But there was nothing. Then I went outside, walked around the clearing, checked the immediate area around the house, but again, nothing. That's when I remembered the storage structure a bit further out, still within the property, but slightly removed from the main cabin. We had passed by it the day before, and I remembered very clearly that it was locked with a padlock. He had told me it was off limits, that it held his uncle's and his father's belongings, things he wasn't ready to go through yet. At the time, I had actually found that kind of touching. It sounded like grief, like someone holding on to memories until they felt strong enough to face them. But that was also the area where the smell felt strongest. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe something had gotten in through the structure. It was old, worn down, and died inside. Or maybe it really was just the age of the place. Materials breaking down, something chemical I didn't understand. But there was a window on the side, and when I leaned in to look, I noticed something strange. The frame was rusted, stiff, like it hadn't been touched in years. But when I pressed against it, I could feel that it wasn't fully sealed. Like it was technically closed, but not locked into place. And with a bit more force, I realized I could probably open it. I wasn't prepared for what happened when I did. The smell that came out of that space hit me like a wall. It was sharp, acidic, overwhelming in a way that made my eyes water instantly. I started tearing up without even realizing it, my body reacting before I could think. It was so much worse than outside, so much more concentrated, that for a second I almost stepped back and closed the window again. I should have. Instead, I leaned in further, trying to see inside. What I saw is something I still struggle to put into words in a way that feels accurate. The entire interior looked like it had been turned into bare earth, like the floor had been dug up and disturbed over and over again. There were tools scattered around, knives, axes, things that didn't belong in a space like that. Not arranged, not stored, just left there. And off to one side, there was a blanket on the ground, dirty, soaked through, stained in a way that didn't leave much room for interpretation. I didn't even have time to fully process all of that before my eyes shifted downward, closer to where I was leaning. And that's when I saw it. A body. There was a woman lying there, partially turned, still dressed. And the only reason I noticed her at first was because of her hand. It was positioned just right for the light from the window to catch something. A ring. That's what drew my attention. And the moment I focused on it, everything else fell into place. The ring was identical to the one he had given me a week earlier. I didn't think. I didn't question it. My body just reacted. I ran back to the cabin as fast as I could, barely aware of how I got there, grabbed whatever I could carry, my phone, the essentials, the small first aid kit I had packed, and shoved everything into my bag. I couldn't stop crying. I was shaking so badly I could barely hold on to anything, and my breathing was completely out of control. It felt like my entire body had switched into survival mode all at once. And then I ran. I ran straight into the forest without any sense of direction, without any plan. I didn't care about getting lost. I didn't care about animals. I didn't care about anything except getting as far away from that place as possible. I had no idea how long I was running for. I'm not athletic, not even close. But in that moment, it didn't matter. Adrenaline does things to your body you don't think are possible. I just kept going, pushing past every limit I thought I had, until eventually my body forced me to stop. I remember collapsing, trying to breathe, crying uncontrollably for maybe 15 minutes before forcing myself up again. And then I kept going. Slower this time, but still moving, still trying to put as much distance as I could between me and that cabin. By the time it was starting to get dark, I was convinced he had already gone back, seen the open window, realized I had found out. I was sure he would come after me. That thought alone kept me moving. And then, finally, I saw another cabin. I don't even remember reaching it properly. I just remember banging on the door, begging for help. A family lived there, people I had never seen before, and they let me in without hesitation. They could tell something was wrong immediately. They told me they didn't have signal either, but they had a satellite phone, and that they would call for help. That was the first moment I felt something close to relief, even though the panic never really left. Part of me was still afraid that somehow this could be connected, that I had just walked into something worse. But there was nothing about them that felt wrong. They were kind, calm, grounded in a way that made me feel safe enough to finally breathe. About an hour and a half later, park rangers and police arrived. From that point on, everything moved quickly. They were incredibly professional, incredibly kind. I was taken to the hospital, kept under observation, and they handled everything with a level of care I honestly wasn't expecting. One of the officers explained that in situations like this, especially involving relationships, the priority is always the victim's safety and privacy. My identity was protected, and everything was handled discreetly. Later, I found out I had run much farther than I thought, miles. Enough that the family who helped me didn't even know that cabin existed. They had no connection to it at all. The area was searched, and when authorities got there, the smell was still present. There were signs that something had happened, disturbed ground, indications that the space had been used, but everything I had seen was gone. No body, no blanket, no tools, nothing concrete left behind. But the dogs reacted. They brought in cadaver dogs, and they alerted in that exact area. Something had been there. It's been 5 years now. The case is still open. I've never seen him again. I moved, completely changed where I live. I'm not in witness protection or anything like that, but I made sure he would never be able to find me. As far as I know, he's still being investigated, but nothing has been made public. No arrests, no closure. And that's the part that's hardest to live with, because I know what I saw. And somewhere out there, there's at least one family that still doesn't know what happened to someone they lost. Meanwhile, he's still out there, still free, still able to exist like nothing ever happened. And I'm the one left waiting, stuck with something I can't forget and can't prove. Hi, my name is John. What I'm about to tell you happened around 2 months ago. And I'll be honest, at the time, I don't think I gave it the weight it deserved. It was definitely unsettling in the moment. But I brushed a lot of it off. Didn't really stop to think about how wrong things actually were. It's only been over these last couple of days, being back home, replaying everything over and over again in my head, going through every detail, every decision, everything I ignored, that I've realized how bad it could have gone. I got out of it fine, nothing actually happened to me physically, but looking back, it was one of the strangest and most genuinely disturbing situations I've ever been in. At the time, I didn't even know what to think, because I had never experienced anything like that before. And that uncertainty made it worse. To get straight to it, I've always been someone who enjoys spending time in the mountains, and I've spent a lot of time in the woods, camping, hiking, climbing. I've done a bit of the Pacific Crest Trail, spent some time camping down in Texas too. But one thing about me is that I've never really done any of it alone. I've always had people with me. The truth is, I'm not great with isolation. I don't handle being alone very well, and I don't really handle being left alone with my own thoughts either. I don't like being at home alone. I don't like doing things by myself. And as I got older, I started realizing that's not exactly a great trait to have. It makes you impulsive, in a way. The first thought that comes into your head is usually the one that comes out of your mouth, because you're not used to sitting with your thoughts, breaking them down, actually thinking things through properly. It was actually my girlfriend who pointed that out to me, and over time I realized she was right. It was affecting me more than I wanted to admit. So, this time I decided to do something different. I planned a short trip, 3 nights out in the Appalachians, and I made a point of doing it alone. The idea was to force myself into that space, to sit with it, to get used to it. The first part would be proper camping, and then for the last 2 nights, I booked a cabin that was relatively close to a small town. Not completely isolated, but still remote enough to feel like it. The cabin itself was cheaper because it was shared. Basically, it had a ground floor and an upper floor, both fully independent. Separate kitchens, separate bathrooms, everything. The only connection between them was an internal door. But it wasn't like a front door. It wasn't that solid. Still, the owner made it sound safe. He said he always knew who was staying there, had everyone's details, did some basic checks. Before booking, I even told him I was flexible with dates and asked if there was a weekend where I'd most likely be alone there. He said that for the dates I picked, nobody else had booked. I even checked again about a week before leaving, just to be sure, and he confirmed it, so I went ahead with it. The first 3 days went great, no issues at all. Honestly, it was better than I expected. I was a little on edge, just because I'm not used to being alone like that, and isolation does mess with your head a bit. But nothing major. Everything felt under control. That changed when I got to the cabin. At first, it seemed empty. I got there, settled in, nothing unusual. But maybe 5 minutes after I walked in, I heard footsteps upstairs, clear as day, and right away, I knew I wasn't alone there. I won't lie, I was a bit annoyed. Not because it wasn't allowed, but because the owner hadn't told me. Still, I knew it was always a possibility, so I tried not to let it bother me too much. I checked the door connecting the 2 floors, and it was actually sturdier than I expected, which helped a bit. My plan was simple, just avoid them as much as possible. I didn't feel like socializing, I just wanted my space. That first night, I noticed something that already felt off. During the day, I barely heard anything from upstairs. But as soon as it got dark, they started moving around constantly. Back and forth, non-stop. It went on for hours. I barely slept. The next morning, I decided to go talk to them. Not in a confrontational way, just to introduce myself, be polite, and maybe get a sense of who they were. I knocked, they answered, and right away I could tell something was off. And I don't mean that lightly. They were genuinely strange. The way they looked, the way they spoke, the way they carried themselves. It all felt wrong in a way that's hard to explain without sounding paranoid. But I'm not exaggerating. There was just something about them. They told me they were night people, said they slept during the day and stayed up all night, moving around, doing their own thing. I didn't really know what to say to that. I just asked if they could maybe keep the noise down a bit during the night because I was trying to sleep. They didn't apologize, didn't really react much at all, just kind of acknowledged it. So I left it at that and went back downstairs. I spent the rest of the day out hiking, trying not to think too much about it, but it stuck with me. The whole interaction just didn't feel right. That evening, when I got back, they were both at the window upstairs, watching me as I walked in. They waved. I waved back, trying to keep things normal. As soon as I got inside, they came downstairs and knocked on my door. Started asking how my day was, making small talk. Then they invited me to have dinner with them. I thanked them, but I said no. I explained that I had booked the trip to spend some time alone, that I needed that space. And that's when their attitude shifted. It was subtle, but noticeable. They didn't like that answer. I tried to smooth it over, made it clear it wasn't about them, just something I needed personally. Eventually, they left, but the vibe was off. That night, I was expecting another restless night with all the noise, but around 11 p.m., I heard their door open and close, and then footsteps heading away from the cabin. I assumed they were going on one of their night walks, which honestly was a relief. It meant I might actually get some sleep. And I did, for a few hours. Around 4 a.m., I woke up. I tend to wake up a few times during the night anyway, usually to go to the bathroom, so that part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was what I saw when I opened my eyes. They were both outside my window, right up against the glass, just standing there, looking in at me while I slept. I can't even describe the kind of shock that hit me in that moment. I jumped up immediately, went to the window, and asked them what the hell they were doing. And the worst part? They didn't even try to hide it. They didn't look embarrassed, didn't try to come up with an excuse. They just said they had seen me sleeping and wanted to check if I was okay, if I was finally getting some rest after the night before. At that point, I was already irritated. But more than that, I was uncomfortable in a way that's hard to explain. I told them straight up that they couldn't do that it wasn't okay. I went to close the curtains, something I hadn't even thought was necessary before, which in hindsight feels insane, but at the time, it just didn't cross my mind. As you can probably imagine, I spent the rest of that night completely awake, just lying there staring at the ceiling, going over what had just happened again and again in my head. There wasn't even a question of going back to sleep. I kept thinking about the way they were standing there, how normal they acted about it, how none of it felt right. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it crossed into something else entirely, something that didn't sit right no matter how much I tried to rationalize it. I kept asking myself why they were even there, why they felt the need to watch me like that. And the more I thought about it, the worse it got. That was supposed to be my last night at the cabin anyway, But even if it hadn't been, there's no way I would have stayed another one after that. As soon as morning came, I didn't waste any time. I packed everything up as quickly as I could, didn't go upstairs, didn't try to talk to them, didn't even want to risk another interaction. I just wanted to get out of there. I made sure I had my things, threw everything into the car, and left. I didn't run, but I moved with that same urgency. Like my body just wanted distance between me and that place as fast as possible. Once I was out of the forest and back on a proper road, I finally called the owner and told him that something really uncomfortable had happened, that there had been people staying in the upper level and that their behavior had crossed a line. There was a pause on the phone, and then he told me something that, honestly, made everything feel even worse. He said there was no one else booked at the cabin. According to him, I was supposed to be the only person there. And that just added a whole other layer to it. Because then what was that? What exactly had I spent 2 nights living with? 2 people who were clearly there before I arrived, who acted like they belonged there, who moved around all night, who watched me sleep, and somehow weren't supposed to be there at all. No booking, no record, nothing. I don't have answers to any of that, and honestly, I'm not even sure I want them. All I know is that this has been stuck in my head for the past 2 months. The more I think about it, the less sense it makes, and the more it bothers me. It's one of those situations where nothing technically happened, but at the same time, something definitely wasn't right. It just made me realize how strange people can be, how unpredictable, and how quickly a situation that seems completely normal can turn into something that genuinely unsettles you. I do know one thing though. I'm not making those same mistakes again. I'm not sleeping in a cabin with open visibility like that, where anyone can just stand outside and look in. I don't know how I didn't think about that before, but I won't ignore it again. And I'm definitely not staying in shared cabins with people I don't know, no matter how much cheaper it is. It's just not worth it. I've always been the kind of person who feels most at ease out in the mountains. Over the years, I've hiked and climbed in a lot of different places across the US. But there's something about the Appalachian range that keeps pulling me back. It's not the folklore or the stories people like to attach to it. It's much simpler than that. The geology, the terrain, the sheer variety you get within relatively short distances. It's one of the few places that never really feels repetitive to me. Because I work remotely, I've been able to take advantage of that and spend long stretches of time out there, moving around, camping, climbing, just living a bit outside the usual routine. A lot of the time, I manage to bring people along, friends from work who can do the same. But I've also done plenty of those trips alone. The one I'm about to tell you about happened roughly 2 springs ago, and to this day, I still don't really know what to make of it. All I know is that whenever it crosses my mind, I get this immediate physical reaction, like a chill that doesn't quite make sense. I come from a background where people tend to look for logical explanations first, where anything that even leans toward the unexplained gets dismissed pretty quickly. So, it's not exactly the kind of story I've had many chances to share. But it did happen, and it stuck with me in a way very few things ever have. Getting straight to it, I was hiking and climbing through a section of the Appalachians on the West Virginia side, fairly far up, close enough to more remote stretches that you don't see many people for days at a time. I'd already been out there for about a week, and I knew going in that the weather could shift quickly. I was prepared for temperature drops, for rain, for the usual unpredictability. But there was a point where it started coming down a lot harder than I expected. Not just a passing shower, steady, heavy rain that didn't look like it was going anywhere anytime soon. So I started looking for some kind of cover, just somewhere to wait it out. That's when I spotted a structure off in the distance. As I got closer, I realized it was some kind of cabin sitting up on a small rise. From afar, I couldn't tell if it had been someone's home at some point, or if it was one of those old fire lookout structures you sometimes find in that region. If it was a lookout, it would have been perfect. Once I reached it and stepped inside, it became pretty clear that it had been abandoned for a long time. It didn't have that semi-maintained look those lookout towers usually have, where hikers still pass through and use them occasionally. This felt different. The place was in rough shape, worn down in a way that suggested no one had cared about it in years. I tried the lights out of habit, but nothing worked. Still, with a flashlight, I could see enough to tell that it had once been lived in. There were remnants of furniture. The layout made sense as a home, just left behind. Even in that state, it did what I needed it to do. It kept the rain off me, gave me a chance to sit down and wait things out for a bit. I had no intention of staying long, definitely no intention of sleeping there. But this is where one of my worst habits kicked in. I've always had this ability, if you want to call it that, to fall asleep almost anywhere. It doesn't matter if I'm on a bus, a train, sitting in a corner at a friend's place, even in situations where I probably shouldn't feel comfortable enough to sleep. I just do. It's been useful at times, but it's also gotten me into situations I probably could have avoided. That day was one of them. I leaned back into a corner, telling myself I'd just rest for a minute while the rain eased up. The place didn't exactly feel welcoming. There was something off about it. But I was tired, a bit worn down from the past few days. And before I really registered it, I'd closed my eyes. When I woke up, it wasn't gradual. It was one of those sudden, sharp wake-ups where your body reacts before your mind catches up. I didn't even know what had pulled me out of sleep, just that something felt wrong. I opened my eyes, and across from me, in the opposite corner of the cabin, there was a shape. At first, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coat hanging off something. Maybe part of the structure casting a shadow in a strange way. But the longer I looked, the less convincing those explanations felt. There was a stillness to it that didn't match an object, but at the same time, it wasn't moving enough to immediately register as a person either. I just sat there, completely still, trying to figure out what I was looking at, hoping, honestly, that it was anything other than someone standing there watching me. After a few seconds that felt way longer than they should have, I slowly reached for my flashlight and aimed it directly at the shape. I don't know exactly what I expected, but I definitely wasn't prepared for how it reacted. The moment the light hit it, It moved, fast, almost instinctively, like someone flinching from sudden brightness. It raised something in front of its face, let out this strange, strained sound that didn't quite sound like a normal shout, and kind of folded into itself. That was enough. I didn't wait to understand it, didn't try to get a better look. I just panicked. I bolted out of that cabin without thinking twice. I'm pretty sure I left one of my bags behind, but luckily, it wasn't anything essential. I had what I needed on me, and at that point, survival instinct just took over. I ran straight into the rain, not even caring about the terrain, just putting as much distance as I could between me and that place. I kept going until I found a shallow rock overhang where I could at least get partially out of the rain and catch my breath. Even then, my mind wouldn't settle. What I'd seen inside that cabin, it had to be a person. But I couldn't understand how. I had checked the place when I came in, swept it with the flashlight, and I was almost certain no one had been there. So where did that person come from? How long had they been there? Were they already inside, just out of sight, watching me the entire time I was asleep? The longer I sat there thinking about it, the worse it felt. I must have been under that rock for close to an hour when I heard something in the distance. A shout. It didn't come from the direction of the cabin. This sounded different, clearer, like an actual call for help. It sounded like a man. Given how slick the ground had gotten with the rain, it wasn't hard to imagine someone slipping, getting hurt. So, despite everything that had just happened, I decided to check it out. I started calling back, moving toward the sound, and eventually I found him. An older man, probably in his 70s, who had slipped while trying to follow his dog into the woods. He told me he'd heard something out there. The dog had taken off after it, and he'd gone after the dog and lost his footing. He'd tried calling for his wife, who was still back at their place, but she hadn't heard him. I helped him up, made sure he was okay, and after a bit, we managed to locate the dog, which had circled back once it heard him calling. From there, I helped both of them make their way back to their cabin. On the way, he asked me what I was doing out there, and I explained that I'd been hiking and got caught in the rain. He didn't hesitate. He offered me a place to stay for the night, said I could crash on their pull-out couch until the weather cleared. I was still shaken from what had just happened, and the idea of being somewhere warm, taking a shower, eating a proper meal, it sounded exactly like what I needed in that moment. Older couples like that tend to be incredibly kind, and more often than not, they know how to make you feel at home without trying too hard. So, I accepted. They were both genuinely welcoming. I got cleaned up, started to relax a little, and for the first time since leaving that other cabin, I felt like my body was starting to come down from the adrenaline. I'll be honest though, I wasn't planning on bringing up what had just happened. We were sitting down for dinner later that night, and for the first time since everything had happened, things started to feel normal again. Warm food, conversation, the kind of environment that makes your body finally unclench without you even realizing it. That's when his wife casually mentioned that her husband had been very lucky to run into me out there. Especially given how unpredictable the terrain gets after heavy rain. She smiled and added that their dog was usually very sweet, really well behaved, but that every now and then he'd get spooked by something they couldn't hear. She pointed vaguely in the direction of the hill and said that, for some reason, it always seemed to be connected to that old cabin up there. According to her, the dog would sometimes pick up on sounds coming from that direction, sounds neither of them could hear, and would go from calm to completely agitated in seconds, running off toward the cabin, barking like something was there. She even laughed a little, saying they never understood how he could hear anything from that distance, but dogs hear things we don't, so they just chalked it up to that. The moment she said that, I felt it hit me. I don't even know how to describe it properly, but it was like all the blood drained from my face at once. I think it showed because she immediately stopped mid-sentence and asked if I was okay, if something was wrong. That's when I told them. I explained that I had actually been inside that cabin earlier, that I hadn't seen anyone when I first walked in, that I had checked the place, and that everything seemed empty. But then I told them how I'd fallen asleep, and how when I woke up, there was someone, or something, there in the corner with me. I didn't try to dramatize it. I just said exactly what I had experienced. They both went quiet for a second and exchanged a look. Not the kind of look people give when they think you're joking or exaggerating, but the kind that carries a shared understanding. Like they both already knew something you didn't. The man was the one who spoke first. He told me that they had been living out there for over 20 years, and that even back then, the cabin up on that hill belonged to someone who kept mostly to himself. About 2 decades ago, that man had taken his own life inside that same cabin. He was found there, alone, and after that, no one ever really claimed the place. It just sat there, slowly falling apart, left to the elements. He went on to say that over the years, a lot of people passing through had mentioned strange things about it. Nothing consistent enough to form a clear story, but enough to give the place a reputation. Some said it felt wrong the moment you stepped inside. Others said they heard things, movement, sounds that didn't make sense. He even mentioned that behind the cabin, there were markings, symbols carved or painted into the wood and nearby surfaces. No one seemed to know exactly what they meant, but people associated them with occult stuff, rituals, things along those lines. Whether that was true or just people letting their imagination run, he couldn't say. What he did say was that they avoided that place as much as possible. The only time they ever went near it was when the dog ran off like that. And even then, they tried to call him back before he got too close. He told me the dog was usually incredibly obedient, calm, affectionate, but whenever it reacted to whatever was coming from that cabin, it was like something flipped. It stopped listening completely. The only thing it focused on was getting there and barking, like it was reacting to something very real in its mind. After that conversation, I didn't say much. I finished dinner, thanked them again, but my head was somewhere else entirely. That night, lying on that couch, I kept replaying everything, what I had seen, how it moved when the light hit it, the sound it made, and now this added layer of context they had given me. I tried to line it up with something logical, something grounded, but nothing quite fit in a way that felt convincing. I finished the rest of my trip after that, but I kept my distance from that area. I didn't go back to that cabin, didn't even pass near it again. And like I said before, I haven't really shared this with many people. It's hard to explain something when you don't fully understand it yourself. Especially when you come from a mindset where things are supposed to have clear explanations. I'm not someone who easily jumps to anything supernatural. I've always leaned toward rational explanations first. But whatever I saw in that cabin, it didn't feel like something I could just explain away.